Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to day 2 of the online training workshop on effective national to local public governance or SDG implementation, organized by United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs through UN Project Office on Governance of the Division of Public Institutions and Digital Government. I would like to request all the participants to mute your audio while not speaking. I'm Praveen Marjan from UNPOG DPIDG UNDESA. On behalf of UNDESA, I would like to thank all the participants for your active participation and engagement on day 1, and also for joining the workshop today. Before we start the session, I would like to quickly go over several announcements, especially for those who could not attend day 1. Next slide, please. Kindly note that the training material of day 1, including the presentations and video recordings, are uploaded on the UNPOG website. And the presentation of day 2 and the video recording will also be uploaded on UNPOG website after the session today. Also, the training toolkit on effective national to local public governance for SDG implementation, which this workshop is pilot testing, is also available at UNPOG's online discussion board for your learning and feedback. The toolkit is composed of total 16 modules, which we hope you will find helpful in addition to the selected modules that are being addressed during this pilot testing workshop. Today, day 2 will be composed of 2 sessions. Session 3 on whole of society approach for SDG localization, and session 4 on financing for SDG localization. We would like to invite participants to actively share your questions, ideas, comments via the chat box throughout the workshop. So these are some of the information that we would like to share before beginning the session 3. And we look towards your very active participation during this workshop. Next slide, please. Next slide. So now I would like to begin the third session on whole of society approach for SDG localization. The session will focus on strengthening stakeholder engagement to implement and review the process of achieving the 2030 agenda at the national and local level. It will also showcase concrete aspects, principles, and constituencies related to meaningful stakeholder engagement and participation provisions, including leaving no one behind. Through this session, participants will acquire knowledge on innovative approaches and tools for strengthening stakeholder engagement for the SDGs, and learn the strategies and approaches for strengthening stakeholder participation. After the presentation, we'll have a breakout group session. We will assign all the participants into different groups, and I would request you to select the group leader and rapporteur for each group, and our colleague will also facilitate the discussion. After the group discussion, we'll invite 1 or 2 groups to share the outcome of the discussion in the plenary. And after the reporting to the plenary session, we'll have a Q&A with presenters. Please, either during the presentation or right after, share your question to the individual speakers via Zoom chat box. And if you want to, you can basically mark a question and say this question is for presenter 1 or presenter 2. So I can just direct it to the presenter. Then we'll wrap up this session and start the next session. Now I would like to present on the whole of society approach for SDG localization. Can we have the first slide, first presentation, please? So as you know, while implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is primarily the responsibility of government, the scale and ambition of the agenda call for, contribution from stakeholders across society, including parliamentarians, citizens, civil society organizations, the private sectors, academics, and the media. And many member states have put in place building block of its implementation, as shown by the voluntary national review reports. So the whole of society approach to 2030 agenda implementation require an enabling environment that promotes partnership and contribution by a wide range of stakeholders to collective impact. The integrated nature of the SDG demands collaboration and cooperation across sectors and in partnership with local communities that understand best how to address local sustainable development challenges. And effective coordination is also the key to avoid duplication of efforts and promote synergies. We can say that partnership can be harnessed to foster innovation, integrated approaches, solidarity and inclusivity, and action to leave no one behind. Next slide, please. So I'll begin my presentation by saying that we need to acknowledge the contribution of and the important role played by all relevant stakeholders, including individuals, families, and communities, intergovernmental organizations, and religious institutions, civil society, academia, media, voluntary associations, and whereas as appropriate, the private sector and industry in support of national local efforts. So here are some 6 points, like the formulation of SDG itself took multi-stakeholder and whole of society approach. Therefore, to finalize the 17 goals, UN conducted a large consultation program and formed expert groups. So the UN General Assembly formulated a 30-member working group to develop the SDGs, and the range of target are too wide-ranging to be achieved by government alone. So what is also unique about the SDG is that it is expected that their formulation, adaptation, implementation, and evaluation would go through whole of society approach. Therefore, whole of society approach means these goals are not just meant to be understood and fulfilled by government and policymakers only. Non-governmental unit of societies like private corporation, non-government organization, think tanks, and other all the stakeholders have a significant role to play. And whole of society approach is the process of engaging multiple stakeholders to reach the consensus. Next slide, please. So multi-stakeholder partnership, which provide an important space from which to develop such solutions that explore options beyond business as usual, and search for the transformational change that respond to these systematic challenges. And there is a clear interdependence between the 2030 agenda and the international normative framework of human rights and other internationally agreed goals, as well as between partnership and the legal rights to participation and other public freedom. So guaranteeing the rights to participation as well as freedom of association, the UN General Assembly expression, information, and right can further support the role of multi-stakeholder partnership, have in delivering the play to leave no one behind, enshrined in the 2030 agenda. Next slide, please. So the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development call for participation of stakeholders in its implementation and follow-up review by improving inclusion and integrated delivery of individual goals through the policy and planning cycle, and localization of SDG goals and targets and indicators, which is one of the main theme of this workshop also, and delivering the voluntary national review reports in follow-up on the report, and boosting action on a priority goal or long-standing challenges. So some of the SDGs that include specific target and participation are target 5.5, target 6.B, target 11.3, target 16.7, target 17.17. Next slide, please. There are various rationale for why governments should make provision for stakeholder engagement in the implementation and review process of the 2030 agenda at all levels. So these are some of the rationales, like stakeholder participation meaningfully in negotiation of the 2030 agenda at the national, regional, local, and global level. They have built up a well of crucial experiences and expertise are being useful in the implementation and review process. Stakeholders, as autonomous and independent actors, can create the space for representing the ideas and interests of ordinary citizens. And they can also give voice to excluded groups, helping ensure that their challenges and experiences are taken into account. And they can promote accountability, transparency, and responsiveness. So they are also involved directly in service delivery, often like targeting most affected by poverty and inequality. So they can bring this experience and sectoral knowledge into the planning, implementation, and review process. Next slide, please. However, there are lots like practical challenges of participation are to include all the stakeholders in this scenario, like obstacle to equal participation and public participation exists in many contexts. This barrier may include direct and indirect discrimination on grounds such as race, descent, gender, language, religion, political, and other opinions like national, ethnic, or social origin, property, and those kind of things. And there are some other practical challenges to participation that includes cost of participation in the meeting, the linguistic need of different communities, which often necessitate translation or interpretation, agreeing who should participate, like including how to ensure the voice of the most marginalized are also being heard. And those most excluded and discriminated against may lack the training, expertise, and confidence to effectively participate in shaping and monitoring the policies that affect them. The assumption that people experiencing poverty and marginalization are powerless, passive victim of these policies rather than political agents capable of participating in decision-making processes that affect their daily lives. And people living in the poverty may have other pressing priorities, such as earning enough money to feed their families. So in some instances, a lack of possession of recognized identification documentary may prevent people experiencing poverty from participating in the civic and political life of their country. Next slide, please. So these are some of the major groups and other stakeholders listed in the listed by the UN. So since the first United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, also known as the Earth Summit, it was recognized that achieving sustainable development would require active participation of all sectors of society and all type of people. And Agenda 21 adopts the Earth Summit and drew upon this sentiment and formalized the 9th sector of society as the main channel through which broad participation would be facilitated in UN activities related to sustainable development. So these sectors are officially referred to as major group and include women, children, and youth, and as shown in the slide. Next slide, please. So now I will talk something about the approaches and tools for strengthening stakeholder engagement for the SDGs. First of all, we need quality engagement, which is about building a process from start to end that delivers meaningful outcome for the organization, leading the engagement and leaves participation, feeling like they have contributed to the meaningful and authentic process for decision making or policy development. And the 2030 Agenda emphasizes human rights, inclusivity, participation, and informed decision making. So systematic quality engagement is needed to respond to the fundamental objective of the 2030 Agenda that no one should be left behind. There is also need for innovation to deepen the level of engagement, going beyond consultation to build trust, create a sense of ownership of the agenda, and develop coherent policies integrating the perspective of different stakeholder and information. In this context, quality multi-stakeholder engagement should be timely, open, and inclusive, and transparent, informed, and iterative. So this principle aims to ensure meaningful, inclusive, sincere, and purposeful whole of society approach to the 2030 agenda implementation. Next slide, please. So this is a planning and assessment tool for quality engagement for the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And this framework identifies 4 dimensions of quality engagement and indicators to support each dimension. It has been designed to extend the discussion about the need for greater level of engagement to the discussion that recognize the need for quality engagement. Dear participants, if you are not talking, please mute your audio. So the framework provides a way for an institution to assess quality of engagement, communicate on expectation and standard of engagement, make informed decision and plan and institutionalize engagement. And this framework is, as I mentioned, based on 4 dimensions like purposeful, well-planned and resource, and focus on a clear objective and with intent to improve over time. Proactive, good provision for communication, outreach, and responsiveness to stakeholder. Inclusive, ensuring that a diverse group of people, in particular those who are vulnerable or marginalized, are able to participate. And transformative, taking approaches that can lead to meaningful change over long term. Next slide, please. So broadly speaking, 4 levels of stakeholder engagement can be useful framework for categorizing a range of approaches for engaging stakeholder group in the implementation and review of the 2030 agenda. So this 4 level includes inform, consult, involve, and collaborate. And a 5th level of engagement like empowerment is also one of the levels that would demand further adaptation. So this diagram provides a brief description of each level. Next slide, please. So this spectrum of public participation tool provide a way to explore different engagement level from informing to empowering. So it highlights how much influence the public can have in decision-making process. The level of interaction changes as the level of influencing grows. So this tool provides a useful framework for examining multi-stakeholder engagement in the 2030 agenda implementation. It sets out different public participation goals moving toward more significant influence on decision-making. Next slide, please. And to set up a stakeholder engagement plan, so the plan can be used, among other things, to frame the strategic purpose of consultation, set up processes to identify stakeholders to be consulted, means, techniques, and method for consultation like face-to-face workshop, online platform, focus group, written comments, and how the consultation process will be documented. And consideration could be given throughout the process as to how to support reporting by relevant stakeholder and how this contribution will be reflected in public policies for the implementation and the follow-up of the 2030 agenda at the national and local level. And awareness raising effort encompasses a range of activities such as simplifying and translating the SDGs into local languages and including the SDGs in school and university teaching program, etc. Next slide, please. So this is a detailed outline that describing the different components of stakeholder engagement strategy, like setting up a vision for stakeholder engagement. It will support in clarifying the objectives that are aimed to be achieved through stakeholder engagement in implementation and follow-up of the 2030 agenda. Justification of the stakeholder engagement, like who stands to gain what, who should be encouraged, organizing a stakeholder mapping should be part of strategy. How should they be engaged? Define the different forms and avenues for engagement consideration, the identified priorities and objectives. What challenges are envisaged and how might this be overcome? What are the plan outcome and outputs and activities? And what resources are needed? And the timeline. A clear timeline is very critical for meaningful stakeholder engagement process and restoring the process. And the last one is evaluating the process. So the evaluation of the process will allow for a review of approaches, identification of gaps and challenges, and agreement on next step. And next slide, please. So a range of innovative methods and tools of engagement can be used in context of national SDG review as well as local reviews. So some practical information for those seeking ideas and inputs for the developing strategies to better engage stakeholders are like crowdsourcing, facilitate town hall meeting, pop-up democracies, feedback kiosks, online platform, and engaging citizens in promoting and monitoring this SDG. And next slide, please. So effective stakeholder engagement is based on the principle that people have right to be involved in decisions that impact them. So this notion gets to the heart of citizenship. And effective governance include a set of fair legal framework that enforce an impartial regulatory body for the full protection of stakeholders. So the principle that underpin effective governance include effectiveness, accountability, and inclusiveness. So there are two levels to consider with institutionalizing the engagement. One is organization level, and another is the whole of government and societal level. And next slide, please. So these are some of the lessons in multi-stakeholder engagement for the 2030 agenda, like transparent, coordinated, participatory, and inclusive approaches to multi-stakeholder engagement are underpinned by policies and framework as a part of an enabling environment. And so many sectors have also been mobilized to contribute to 2030 agenda, like multi-stakeholder and sector-specific coalition are emerging with civil society organization, local and regional government, academia, and the private sector. And so I conclude my presentation here. So now, if you have any question, you can use the chat box to write the questions. Now, I would like to, after another discussion, we'll have group discussion. And now it is my distinct pleasure to invite Dr. Alex Brillantes to deliver the presentation on the whole of society approach. Dr. Brillantes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Praveen. I would like now to start by share screening. Is it okay now? Everyone share screen, my friend?
You can share the screen.
Fantastic. You can see it now?
Yeah, we can see.
Great, great. Thank you very much. Let me just, okay. So I'm really privileged to be part of this presentation, even as I would like to thank Carol, Grace Salvacion, who is with you, who will be my timekeeper. So she will tell me when 3 minutes is almost up, and I just have 3 minutes. And I was looking at the list of participants very quickly. I saw my friend George Labaki, of course, Samuel Dana, whom I've met a long time ago, my Dean Mendoza, and of course, some of my friends, Professor Maricel Fernandez, Ravi Palse, my friends from the University of Makati, Joe Carr and Joal, and many more. I'm glad they're here, but I'm sure some of what I'm saying we've already talked about, but it's really deepening it within the context of whole of society approach. So thank you, Dr. Praveen, for this opportunity. And I will indeed stick to 15 minutes with Carol's help. But we've heard Praveen make his presentation, and I would like to take off or even quote unquote deepen this whole of society approach to localize SDGs. Why? Because we've heard this method, whole of government, whole of society, sometimes it's at the level of rhetoric. I'm not saying it's been at the level, but sometimes I think, how do we internalize this in terms of really whole of society? And that's part of my presentation earlier, because we've heard of the SDGs, we've heard of the MDGs, if you recall. Some of us were born when we talk about Agenda 21, but we continue to talk about addressing this whole notion of addressing poverty. And I think it's very, very important that we continue to deepen it. And my presentation will look at 4 handles on how we can really deepen, if you may, or do this whole of society approach. And I said 4 handles, a framework that we've been utilizing for some time ago together with my friend, Dr. Kalina, and of course, Dr. Maricel Carag, who's with us. We've talked about the importance of, hey, if we're talking whole society, we have to look at formal and informal institutions. We have to look at our mindsets. Sometimes the mindset is really the problem. But very important, as Praveen mentioned, the importance of leadership for whole of society, and super important, citizens engagement. Get the people to be involved. End of story. We all know about the World Health Organization. They talk about the whole of society approach, meaning, again, I've said this earlier, engaging civil society, communities, academia, where we're from, media, voluntary associations, families, including individuals. And that's something very, very, very important. because we can talk about whole of society at the international level, national level, even local government level, but if the individuals themselves are not engaged, or more importantly, Praveen said, they should be involved, but you know what? They should demand to be involved. They should demand to be involved. For me, that's what it's all about. But how do you create the enabling environment for them to demand to be involved? Because sometimes, dear friends, we all know that we have the enabling environment, but equally important, you can have a disabling environment. A disabling environment, some of the obstacles that were pointed out by Dr. Praveen about obstacles to equal political and public participation. Okay, so that's the whole of society. Of course, if we look at the traditional whole of society, whole of government approaches on localizing SDGs, we're talking about SDGs. How do you localize SDGs? Whole of government, equally important, whole of society. But this was a paradigm of the, I think, the World Health Organization. They talk about the responsibility for health, and the social determinants rest with the whole society, and that is produced in new ways between society, government, and individuals. Individuals. Today we're talking about the pandemic. How many of the individuals are not using masks? You can have nice laws, enforce them, but at the end of the day, it's us as individuals getting involved. It's us as individuals not really being required to be involved, but wanting to be involved, and that is the enabling environment. Okay, well, this is also from the, if you look at this paradigm, which also I think from WHO, we talk about the role of policy, organization, community, interpersonal, and there's this point here about nudging. How do we nudge? I'll talk about that in a while. But most important, or equally important, not most important, is of course the role of the individual when we're talking about the whole of society approach. These are the key messages, as I mentioned, that it's important that we look at these four particular handles: institutions and processes, our mindsets, leadership, political will. Dr. Praveen mentioned that, but equally important, how do you get the people to be involved? As I said, I will take off from the presentation. Dr. Praveen, he talked about the enabling environment for whole of society, multi-stakeholder partnerships, collaboration, and more. I just, Praveen sent this to me earlier. I've worked with Praveen for what? How long, Praveen? More than 4 or 5 years. I've known him ever since I was an outstanding graduate student at SKKU and worked with us at AAPA. So he talked about these 4 aspects: enabling environment, multi-stakeholder partnerships, and collaboration. Okay, so these were the key takeaways that he mentioned. Again, I just mentioned them: the importance of the importance of collaboration, the importance of mechanisms to broker and strengthen. Question: who will broker? Who will strengthen? No? Promote partnerships that contribute. So it's really partnership. Government alone cannot do it. Private sector alone cannot do it. International, we are all working together as far as this is concerned. No? And of course, you talk about the importance of take an inclusive approach, or partner an inclusive approach, and of course, partner according to high standards. Okay. Now, so I think, dear friends, let's not forget that this all should be aligned to, if you may, the SDGs, and should be aligned to what a document that just came out quite lately, the so-called the HDR, the Next Frontier. For me, it's a very, very important document. I'm sure all of you have seen it, or some of you can download it easily, but please go ahead and download it, because for me, it's very, very appropriate, especially in these days of the pandemic, where we say, what are our choices? Do we choose in the face of uncertain futures? That's where we are today. Existential threats. Do we choose in the face of uncertain futures to embark on bold new paths that expand human freedoms while easing planetary pressures? Or do we go the so-called business as usual? And Praveen mentioned about the fact that it is not business as usual, especially with the pandemic. My discussion will talk about the whole of society approach in general, but as instructed by my good friend Praveen, focus on, draw illustrations from our experiences with the pandemic. The UCLG, United Cities for Local Governance, talk about the, again, whole of society, whole of government approach. They mentioned the importance of strengthened collaboration between all levels of government, but equally important, the robust existence of robust national SDG localization. We are fortunate to have participated in some of the sessions in the United Nations when they talk about the country report, our voluntary national sector report. It's very, very important, but it is your enabling framework. Question: how does it go down to the level of the country? How does it go to the level of the individual engaged communities, as pointed out by the United Cities for Local Governments. It's within this context that we talk about the importance of decentralization. Whole of society, who are at the front lines? These are the local governments, these are the local communities. Provide the enabling environment for them to be involved, if you may. And this is now the process of decentralization, wherein you transfer powers, authorities, empowerment of local governments, including local communities, including the citizens. So as I mentioned, these four aspects, I'll discuss them now, okay? First, this is a framework that we developed with my friends, like I said, with Dr. Kalina and Professor Maricel, about the importance of institutions, processes, political and economic processes. Very important, the enabling framework, the formal structures, laws. We talk about the enabling framework as pointed out by Praveen earlier. Are they there? And many of us do have our SDGs. We have even our localization SDG strategies. Very, very important. I was once with the Local Government Academy of the Ministry of Local Government, and we talk about the importance of localizing because nice programs at the international, national level are not are useless, if you may, if they are not localized. I remember we had the discussion before. How do you localize our Agenda 21? How do you localize our MDG? Now we're talking about how do we localize our SDG. Point, front lines, very, very important, where the rubber hits the road. But institutions should provide that. Then we also talk about the importance of citizens' engagement. As I said, people should be involved, but equally important, people should demand to be involved. They should learn. And because at the end of the day, how do you create the environment? Because people can just say, okay, that's fine with me. Hey, let's be involved. Let's demand to be involved within the context of this notion called equity. Equity, which is really a bias for the marginalized, or bias for the vulnerable sector, which is central to our discussion of SDG, and equally important, a bias for the next generation, intergenerational equity. We should be involved, not because for us, but it is for the next generation, for our children, for our grandchildren. I have 2 grandkids, and sometimes I wonder what kind of world we're living to these children, and that is what citizen engagement is all about. That is what whole of society approach is all about, and that's even what involving the next generation, if you may, within the context of intergenerational equity. And of course, the last point, I'm not spend time on this because I know that I don't have that much time. Leadership is important. Dr. Praveen talked about the importance of leadership, the importance of political will. Political will is very, very important. Do we have the appropriate leadership? And the last part is about values. I'll discuss it in a while. But my point, dear friends, is really a reform framework that could somehow enable the so-called whole of society approach. Okay, those 4 aspects. So institutions, I mentioned Douglas North. You're all familiar with Douglas North and of course Elinor Ostrom, who talked about the importance of institutions, formal and informal. And sometimes it's these institutions that provide the enabling framework, which is very, very important for the whole of society approach. Question, do you have your voluntary national sector review? Do you have your SDG strategy at the national and even local level? Do you have, or do we have an SDG localization strategy? I think Praveen also mentioned that. In accordance to providing the so-called rules of the game, in accordance to providing the enabling framework. But let me mention sometimes it can be an enabling framework, but that enabling framework can also sometimes be a disabling framework. That's another story altogether. But it's important that even as we look at this, we look at it with a critical perspective. Adriana Alberti, a very respected friend of mine from UNDESA, whom of course my friend Praveen knows, talk about the importance of institutions also in terms of visible and invisible hidden structures. Remember what Ostrom and Douglas North said? Formal and informal structures. Okay. Well, this is what Adriana mentioned, the importance of structures, the importance of processes within the context of providing the whole of society approach. The second part, Adriana mentioned the importance of changing our mindsets in our own paradigm with my friends, Dr. Kalina and Professor Hernandez. We talk about the importance of changing the mindsets, changing the behavior. Unfortunately, it can be out there, but if it is not appropriately localized, even within the bureaucracy, it can be a problem. If you look at this was a paradigm drawn by Dr. Alberti, but similarly, I'm on the other side of the world, I'm in the Philippines, and she did something, and we did similar to that sometimes the attitude, the mindset can be the problem, okay, as an obstacle to the whole of society, as mentioned also by Dr. Praveen. Number three, well, nudge was mentioned. Nudge. How do you nudge them? Of course, you just don't tell them, do this, do this, do this. There's this thing called by Taylor and Sunstein that you don't tell them to do it, but there's a way of doing it in terms of a theory in behavioral economics that you can nudge people to do that. This is an excellent book. I'm sure many of you have seen this, but these are indirect ways to influence behavior towards getting them involved. The third part would be in terms of leadership. Remember, we talk about structures, institutions, behaviors. Leadership is important. When one talks about leadership, this is what we talk about: the importance of political will, the importance of the enabling framework provided for by the leadership. And leadership, this is one of my favorites. I learned this when we were working, we have this project with the leading Asian Japan. The importance of phronesis. Phronesis is really practical wisdom. You might be at the level of idealism, but it's very important that you're also at the level of practical. So we talk about practical wisdom. Practical wisdom. In the Philippines, we say it has to land. Kailangan maglanding. Within the context of, it's not always up there, it's not always down here. How does one bring it? Within the context of theory and praxis. Really practical wisdom, whole of society approach. Number four, well, this was also mentioned by Adriana Alberti, who talked about the importance of political will. I mentioned that earlier. I want that. The last part, I know my friend Carol is monitoring me. I think about 5 more minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Citizen engagement to localize the SDGs. This is what Dr. Praveen mentioned. Very, very important. How do we get the citizens to be involved to localize the SDGs? Whole of society, citizens engagement, which is really at the front lines, because if you have the citizens, you also have now the local governments. Equally important, dear friends, local governments can help operationalize the localization of SDGs, or equally important, they can be obstacles to this. So apart from involving our local governments, the citizens themselves. I mention this all the time because, hey, we've heard this before. We've heard about good governance, we've heard about participation, transparency for the longest time, but it continues to be a valued principle. And the concept of participation is changing. It is moving towards just simple consultation, but equally important, engaging them to make decisions within the society. But most important, I say, get them to demand to be part of this process. So these are some of this. I think I get this also from the slides of Dr. Praveen about the importance of awareness raising. Let them demand. Whole of society, come on, it cannot be government alone. We want it because it's not for us. Remember, it's for the vulnerable. It's for our children. Hence, SDG 2030. Guys, this is in 10 years. How far are we from 2030? Remember MDG? We started 2000, 2015. We asked for an extension, if you may. Now we're talking 10 years. Question, and given the pandemic, is it realizable? Of course, it is there. We have to be optimistic, but it only is realizable. You have this whole of society, all of us getting involved, and I talk about the four major instruments, if you may, as far as this is concerned, including what Praveen mentioned, empowerment of citizens. I'll end with some examples because instructions probably talk about some examples. You know what? I was just part of this Leading Asia project in Japan for the past 10 years or so, for some time now. And we had a meeting, in fact, just last week. So I said, oh, this is perfect. Well, many, many examples out there, but this is perfect in terms of what are these. We have one, Thailand came up with their strategies, community resilience, centralized leadership, multi-sectoral collaboration, and pandemic preparedness. In addressing the pandemic, which of course can be used as an example for attaining SDGs, you talk about these 4 things: community resilience, community level, centralized leadership, multi-sectoral cooperation, and response to the preparation. Okay, they did that in Thailand. Importance of centralized leadership within the context of decentralization. It is a paradox: centralized leadership, decentralized implementation. Vietnam had this. This was really the enabling framework of the Vietnamese government in terms of addressing the pandemic, in terms of government support packages. My friend Dr. Bu Koy Tong did this. Vietnam's response, of course, has been quite one of the best stories as far as this is concerned. And this is an example from my good friend. His name is Eko Prasojo from Indonesia. He talked about 3 variables: integrated governmental relations, remember the enabling framework, regulatory framework, and citizen awareness. We can talk about the regulatory framework in a while. Okay. That's the citizens awareness. Just let me know, Carol, if I'm over time. citizens awareness, high violation of social restriction. So we as a people should get involved. And they talk about the importance of the compliance culture in Indonesia. And that is also part of whole of society approach. Okay. And this one from Japan, an excellent presentation by a good friend of mine who talked about his conclusion. It is time that both national and local government would strive to make every effort more than ever. We've heard this before, but how has this been operationalized? Are there appropriate structures? Are our mindsets prepared for this? Or equally important are the people engaged? I will end by talking about the Philippines. In the Philippines, we have also an example. We have an interagency task force that emphasizes, again, a variation of the whole society approach, national government enabled, local government-led frontlines, but people-centered. At the end of the day, when we're talking about whole of society, we ask for whom, for whom, for whom. Because it could be, and it should be people-centered. It should be for the vulnerable. It should be for the next generation. Remember this whole notion of equity. If you're interested in this, just PM me and I can send you an article that we've written on this. Okay, so the Philippines and the pandemic, I've already mentioned that, and also the importance of leadership. I go back to what Dr. Alberti mentioned, because to a certain extent, she's in the other side of the world, Washington, in New York rather, and here we are in the Philippines. When without knowing each other, I think our paradigms somehow reinforce each other about the importance of those four aspects: structures and institutions, mindsets, leadership, and of course, get the citizens involved. And I end with this. Towards what? Towards the attainment of SDGs. We did this framework with Dr. Lisan maybe about less than a decade ago, but on the center are the SDGs. SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. This can only be attained if you have your whole of society approach, including the fact that, hey, we have to communicate, disseminate information, which is what we are doing together today as a community in whatever part of the world you are from. So these are the group discussion points raised by Dr. Praveen, and I think we will go to a discussion later. But I think I've just used up my 15 minutes, Carolyn, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, but let's not forget the four aspects, whole of society. It's not only one aspect: enabling framework, our mindsets, leadership, and citizens should demand towards what? Vision, because the vision, attaining the SDGs by 2030, is for all of us, including our next generation, our children, our grandchildren. It is for them. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Dr. Praveen and dear friends.
Thank you, Dr. Brillantes, for emphasizing for enabling framework like formal and informal institutions, processes, mindset, leadership, citizen engagement, political will, and demand from the citizen to be involved. And role of individual is also important, and importance of collaboration and decentralization. So now we will start breakout session. My colleague will guide you to the different breakout room. Please select the group leader and rapporteur for each group. And so after the group discussion, we will invite one or two groups to share their outcome of their discussion in the plenary. We have 25 minutes for the group discussion. Uyang, can we go to breakout session now? Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. So can we have the group discussion slide, please? Okay, here you go. So these are the questions we are going to address in this group discussion. Can we have someone as a group leader or rapporteur? Anyone who wants to volunteer, please. Is there anyone who can? No one? Okay. So we have 16 participants, including me and our colleague. So first, like, the 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goal, it represents the fundamental shift in thinking in international development, recognizing the interconnectedness of prosperous business, a thriving society, and a healthy environment. And the agenda named all three sectors as the key development actors, and requires an unprecedented level of cooperation and collaboration among civil society, private sectors, government, NGOs, foundation, and the citizen as well. So I would like to pose this question, like what mechanism and platform are available for stakeholders from civil society and the private sector and the individuals to contribute to the implementation of SDGs in your country? Can we go through, can I invite Mr. Bentley? Hello, Mr. Bentley. Okay. Maybe I can start with Professor Mendoza, because she's very much active in this localization process also. Professor Mendoza.
Dr. Praveen,
Yes.
why are you always looking at me? Well, anyway, in the Philippines, we have the SDG, because we have the institution for the coordination and implementation of the SDG, building from the MDG. And the SDG is part of it's part of the PDP, and there are interagency groups, including the private sector and the civil society organizations in the different goals of the SDG. So with regard to mechanisms and platforms, we have national level, regional level, some to the extent at the local government level. Basically because the SDG plans are cascaded to the lower levels, and there are interagency groups and technical working groups and task forces. For example, at the national level, with regard to the voluntary reporting, there are interagency committees which are coordinated by NEDA. The Philippine Statistics Authority is the data generation agency of the government, and there are a number of interagency committees there for SDG reporting. I was part of the interagency for governance statistics, and the SDGs 16 was assigned to our interagency group. So fairly, in terms of plans and platforms, we have at the different levels, and the whole of society and the whole of government approach is fairly adapted by the Philippine government.
Thank you, Professor Mendoza. So I also know, like, we have been, when we say about the good practices, we take example of NEDA most of the time. So it's very, good for other countries also to have this kind of organization or this kind of mechanism to localize the SDGs as a whole of society approach. We have Mr. Chamo from Mozambique. Mr. Chamo, can we have your insight on this question?
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chamo. Yes.
Yes, thank you. It's very early in Mozambique, but I'm enjoying this very important discussion about the localized Sdgs. Yes, I would like just to emphasize the role of the stakeholders regarding the Sdg monitoring and evaluation, because most of the projects and the programs activities are being implemented by the government. So how can we join efforts? Because most of the time, some civil society organizations, they report the activities, funded projects for the partners or other donors. But the key question, how to join efforts, just to have one report mechanisms, not different platforms to report on that. I would like to give some insight of that. And of course, other challenges regarding the capacity development in terms of, all these, all those stakeholders to have some, most of most of these trainings, activities, and other capacity development, the beneficiaries are mostly the government. I'm talking in the context of Mozambique. So how the experience from others participants, and how can the UNDESA can advise us on single approach for these ones. That's my my preliminary points of introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chamo. So we have, can we invite Mr. Leonard Chan? If he's available. Or anyone who wants to talk about the mechanism and platform that are available for stakeholder.
Yeah, hello.
Okay, yes.
Sorry, it's Leonard online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you can answer the first question, please.
Right, yeah. So basically from our perspective, sorry, by the way, I represent the private sector organization.
Yes.
Right, and what we have got, what we actually practice over here towards working towards the implementation of ADG, we sort of have a consolidated approach where we sort of work together with all the different stakeholders. And from our stakeholder perspective, we look at stakeholders out there, like, for example, the NGOs, the CSOs, and also the the development agencies, and also the government. We look at a common agenda, for example, right? Out of all the SDGs, we see what is a common agenda that we have got. And then we sort of try and work towards that. And then we also look towards seeing areas of where the strengths and weaknesses are. So for example, if we have a strength in this particular area that we want to tap into, we work towards that area. And if there's working along with CSOs, if they have another strength in another area and need support, we actually help them. So in this way, we able to achieve various objectives towards meeting our SDGs and getting all-inclusive approach. That's a mechanism that we use over here. And we also include our people at our grassroots level, also the people on the ground, because we all learn a lot from them, what their needs are and the requirements are, and we sort of embed them into our scoping and see how we can actually factor that in.
Thank you, Mr. Chan, for providing, from the perspective of private sector, which you have like consolidated approach in, a whole of society approach. Thank you, Leonard. So we have Hema Hariram. Can we invite Hema Hariram if she is available?
Good morning. I'm
Good
calling
morning.
from South Africa.
Yes.
Look, I'm with a non-government organization, actually a union, but we work closely with government.
Yes.
And I want to concur with some of the speaker from Mozambique. We don't find government sharing, and with all the private sector sharing with us freely their plans in terms of the SDGs and the implementation. We hear oftentimes after the fact. So I think from our perspective, we're a critical stakeholder. We work in the education sector. So we do work there collaboratively in terms of the SDG goals from the education perspective, but broader in terms of societal issues, we're not engaged, and we would very much like to be more, be included in the engagement, because the schooling environment and the university, the higher education, TVET college sectors are small entities which actually replicate larger society where we engage. So we would like, from that perspective, to be included. So that's what I want to put on the table from our entity in terms of our engagement with government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saima. So we don't have enough time. We have like only 15 minutes. I think we can go to question 3 because question 2 is similar like question 1. So how can government take into account the view of multi-stakeholder in developing their plan for implementing the 2030 agenda? Because just now Ms. Saima said the government is not sharing, the private sector is not sharing to the non-governmental organization. So how can we tackle this problem in your country, or how in not only in your country, or in the global level, or in the regional level, or in the national level? Can we invite Naduni, if she is here? Or what about Pompey? Hello? Okay. So then we can go to Mr. Chamo. What Mozambique government is taking into account the view of multi-stakeholder engagement in developing their plan for implementing the 2030 agenda. Mr. Chamo.
Thank you, Mr. Brian. Yes, yes, and I think in my previous intervention, I was emphasized more on challenge regarding this. I mean, the involvement of other stakeholders. But of course, there is some point of entries, such a government interact with other stakeholders. For example, there is a platform. I mean, you call G20 platform, which involves discussions where there are involvement in discussion with the different stakeholders like private sectors, the key relevant ministers of economic most related, some CEOs, civil organization. So, and this platform we discuss regularly about the role of each stakeholder to implement Sdgs. But of course, there is a consultant mechanism. But I think we need more, I mean, institutionalization of these forums in order to this discussion, this consensus can take other steps. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but we need some institutionalization of this process, because this can be easy to monitor and to evaluate for what the stakeholder is doing I mean, to leverage the Sdgs, because sometimes it's difficult because there are some isolated action, let's say that, input in that, let's say isolated project that be implementing for each stakeholder. But if you could have some single agenda and say, of course, there is this platform that you discuss, but you have been challenging about the concrete and concrete indicators just to monitor and evaluate. So yes, you have a platform, multi-stakeholder platform discussion, but you're still facing challenges. That's all I wanted to share now. Thank you.
Yeah, so what I got from you is that there is consulting mechanism, but there is a platform also, but still there is a challenges. So yes. There should be some kind of institutionalization of the process to engage the multiple stakeholder, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and from the point of view of private sector, Mr. Chan, how can government take into account for involving private sector in developing their plan, Mr. Chan?
Are you with me?
Mr. Chan, Leonard, Mr. Leonard
Oh.
Chan.
Okay.
Okay, I think he left the platform. No, he's still here. Mr. Leonard, are you with us? Okay, maybe we can go to Ms. Hema. So how can government take into account the views of CSOs or non-government organizations in developing the plan for the implementing the 2030 agenda, Ms. Hema?
Thank you. I think, as I'm speaking on behalf of our entity, we need, from government's perspective, I'm very concerned that we're not looking at it as just as a compliance checklist, and we need to be more serious. And it's important to have engagement with stakeholders on the SDG and the plans for 2030. We see it being brandied about when there's public statements being made, but whether they're very serious in actually ensuring that all the finer details are met, we don't see that happening from where we are standing. So I think greater involvement from the outset, inclusivity from the beginning, to say these are the goals, these are the expectations, and we work collectively towards a common goal. And I think for us, it seems as if it's piecemeal. When it's convenient, then it's being bandied about. When we have what's called SONA, which is the State of the Nation's Address, then you hear of the SDG goals. Or if there's there's from a specific sector, when the minister is speaking, then SDG goals relevant to the particular sector is being bandied about, and then you don't hear of it again. And so I think we need to be more serious about it. And the start would be to start with the people who work on the ground with the broader society, and to see whether it's translating. Because sometimes some of the visions may be achievable in some areas and others not. So it's important to engage and to see whether it is effective or not. Because often we've just come out of the UN and the CSW 65, and there's so many things we've had on site, and we were checking on previous years, only to find it's probably just put on paper, but actually hasn't translated too much over time. So we cannot be doing things for the sake of compliance, that we've had this meeting, we have what's called Localize, which is the same as a big meeting or a conference. And then we talk at length, and then year in, year out, we have the same conversation. And it shouldn't be happening. We need to be more accountable now. That's where I want to stop. Thank you.
So I think you are absolutely, to the point, like greater involvement from the outside and greater involvement of the, from the grassroots level people. So I would like to hear from Leonard Chan from the perspective of private sector, if he's still here. Mr. Leonard, are you with us?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Sorry, I think I must have been I must have dropped out my connection. Sorry, what was the question again?
So how can government take into account of the views of private sector in developing their plan for implementing the 2030 agenda?
Okay. Yeah, so for us, basically, again, we sort of take this whole of society approach.
I think we lost you. Mr. Chan, we cannot hear you. I think the connection is Mr. Chan? Mr. Chan, we cannot hear you.
With the private sector.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, we cannot
Hello?
hear you properly. Your connection is disturbing, I think.
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead again.
Okay, yes. So probably from the Pacific context, what we've got, for example, in PG, we've got a very strong consultation with our local governments over here. So we have a stakeholder consultation meetings with the government every now and then, trying to see what private sector needs are there and what are the government needs towards helping the economy move towards achieving the SDG goals and the agenda that's out there. So, for example, yesterday we had a very good consultation process with all our different stakeholders from all different industry sectors, right? So putting forward what is best, not only for the nation, but for the economy and for every people out over here. And that approach that we take sort of gives us the opportunity to see what may work, what may not work right, what has lessons learned from other best practice countries, and actually implement them. So again, we believe in that whole inclusive approach, working with all the people to actually achieve those things.
Thank you, Mr. San. Now, I would like to invite Professor Mendoza one more time to, highlight what are the actions our government can take to take into account the view of multiple stakeholders. Yeah.
I was about to write you in the chat box.
Yeah.
Officially, it looks like there is a whole of society and whole of government approach in implementing and localizing SDGs. But if we look at the nuances of SDG implementation and the kind of partnership and engagement with other sectors, we may have a problem with regard to whether the multiple stakeholders have been engaged and have been empowered so that they own the SDG implementation. It's fairly officious in the sense that there is an official plan, there are mechanisms and platforms in place, there are official partnerships in place. But at what level these are done, actually, I'm actually focusing on what Dr. Alex said on embracing and for the multiple stakeholders to embrace and be empowered and claim responsibility for the SDG implementation. So what I'm saying is that officiously, there are platforms and mechanisms in place, but to what extent that they cascade and are embraced by the multiple stakeholders is a different matter.
Thank you, Professor Mendoza. We got lots of insight from you as always. Now our breakout session is going to finish, so we can leave this room and go back to the plenary session. Thank you for your active participation.
Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are from. My name is Woo-Young Kim, Administrative Assistant of UNPOG, and I will be the moderator of this breakout group session. And as our colleague Pravin Mahajan has explicated, we will be having this breakout session for 25 minutes. And we will be briefly introducing ourselves before we move on. I have here our two interns who will
Can
be
you
helping me
guys?
out.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the sound.
Yes, I can hear you, but can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
I can hear you
Okay.
too.
Thank you for the confirmation. So we have two interns here who will be helping me out with this group session. We have Sarah Lim and also Mingyong Ellen Shin will be helping us out. So Sarah, before we actually share the screen, let's have a brief introductory moment. Let's make it real quick. Just maybe state where you are from, your name, and your position and organization. Can we start from on no particular order? Maricel Fernandez, can you briefly
Yeah,
introduce yourself?
good afternoon from the Philippines. I'm Maricel Fernandez. I'm assistant professorial lecturer of the School of Diplomacy and Governance of the De La Salle College of St. Benilde. Nice to meet you, everyone.
Thank you. Can we move on to Joel Hilario, please?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jose Alvaro Hilario. I'm Joal. I'm working in the government at the Department of Public Works and Highways. I'm currently a project engineer, and I'm also studying Doctor of Public Administration at the University of Makati now on my second year.
Thank you. Reni Somnath, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm from South Africa. I work for the South African Democratic Teachers Union. I'm an education officer. Basically, we engage with government related to policy matters and other matters that affect both teachers and learners. Thank you.
Thank you. May we move on to Evelyn? Petra Kalenzi Asio.
Yes, I'm called Evelyn Asio Patra. I'm from Uganda. I'm an assistant lecturer in the College of Computing and Information Sciences. I focus on information systems. Makerere University.
Thank you very much. Can we have Molina introduce oneself, please? Or while we wait for her or him, can we move on to Kasahun Gelana? Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right.
Yeah, I'm Kasahun Garana from Ethiopia, and I'm a SNU second year PhD student.
Okay. Thank you very much. Molina, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, I can't get my video going on, so. All right. My name is Molina. Once again, I work with the ICT authority in my country as a principal project ICT engineer. Thank you, and nice to meet everyone.
Thank you. Can we have Jargana Ivanova? Or while we wait for one, can we move on to Diggy Indra?
Hello, my name is TJ. I'm a student in Seoul National University and I'm from Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have Alka Barat introduce oneself, please?
Good morning. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I'm professor with architecture and planning in India.
Thank you
Good
so
luck
much.
for the sessions.
Thank you. Can we have Nusrat Ali?
I am Nusrat Ali, Assistant Director, Employees Old Age Benefit Institution, Government of Pakistan.
Thank you. Can we have Gurnanger Banda? Or can we move on to Elias?
Hello, everyone. I'm Elias from Tanzania, but currently I'm pursuing PhD studies at Seoul National University. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Can we have Yan Myo Ong present herself or himself, please? Or we can move on to May Kasum Pang. Can you please introduce yourself?
Afternoon. Hope you can
Hi.
hear me well.
Yes.
Hi. So I'm Ika Sumpang. I'm from Philippines. I am studying PhD at the University of Makati, and I'm working at the pharmaceutical company as an HR and admin manager. Thank you, and thank you for having me here.
No problem, and thank you for joining. We have Vivian, but one said one is in the office, so maybe one is not able to introduce oneself. I think we have basically covered everybody introducing oneself. So if this is all, can we now move on to the group discussion, please? Thank you, Sarah. So now we have this group discussion questions here. There are 3. As a moderator, my role would pretty much end here. So I would like to select one group leader who can kindly read out these questions and ask the group members here to share their ideas and insights of their own country cases. Would there be a volunteer to take this group leader role, please? It would be very much appreciated if you could kindly step up. Because if not, I would have to assign one of you randomly.
Kim, can I ask one question?
Sure, okay.
Or in fact, I'll just put one statement. I don't know if any country has holistic frame of involving stakeholders, civil society with most of the concerned SDGs. I'll make it more clear. Like stand-alone SDGs working, yes. But how do we integrate different benefits of one SDG to the other one, such that we can comprehensively get benefits of SDG to the society? Should I make myself more clear?
So I guess the question you are bringing up here is the difficulty of integrating all SDGs while promoting a holistic approach to engage all the stakeholders. Is that correct?
Yes, the point is not difficulty. The point is concern. Have you ever come across any mechanism with any government taking into consideration a holistic approach towards integrating as well as mutual benefits of one SDGs to the other one?
Thank you for this question. I think this should probably be addressed back in the plenary to our speakers. Would you be able to save this question for later and ask to the speakers after this group discussion, please?
I'll just try, but I have just one small meeting, so maybe if I'm there, I'll take it up. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kim.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. If there's no volunteer, can I ask Maricel to kindly be the group leader for this group discussion? It's not that hard. It's just reading out the question for the group and asking our group members to come up and share their ideas.
Okay.
Thank
So
you so much.
are we going to do it one by one, or I will just read it out at once and then each of you will answer? So
So you will read these 3 questions out loud, and we
Okay.
will be inviting whoever needs to speak.
Okay, so I'll do that. So
Thank you.
the first question is, what mechanisms and platforms are available for stakeholders from civil society and the private sector to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs? And the second one, these are all interrelated questions. So the second one,
May we go one by one, if that is
okay,
okay?
no problem. So anybody who would like to answer first?
This is Alka. I think we do not have, I'm not very sure of the total system, but I have not come across very formal and institutionalized system for extending any platform. I'm an academician, so I'm sorry, I have a limited. Right. So if that could do.
Can I answer based on my experience? I would agree with Alka. There are initiatives that were done by different agencies and even UNDP, for example. In my case, I'm currently doing an evaluation of the Roads to SDGs project that is being done by the UNDP in coordination with the Department of Interior and Local Government, DBM, Department of Budget Management, and also with the provincial local governments. So it's an interrelation of all these different layers of government, but it doesn't only involve the government sector, but it also involves the civil society. The thing is that with the implementation of the Roads to SDGs project that is applicable to the whole country, there is this so-called governance hubs. What is governance hubs is called G hubs. These are a group of non-government organizations, but because for all you know, in the Philippines, all our NGOs are pretty organized. I'm referring to the non-government organization. They are organized and they have a group of NGOs that are put together. For example, we have the Transparency and Accountability Network, TAN. It's called TAN, and they are the ones looking at the monitoring of the project. So this is so as I can say from the previous presentation of Dr. Brillantes, whole of society approach is being applied in this case. So this is one particular project of the government, which is the Department of Interior and Local Government, and they are mandated to localize or mainstream the SDGs in the local government units. As you may know, there are 72 provinces in the Philippines, and then there are more than 1,000 cities and municipalities, and 42,000 barangays or the village sector. Okay, and then the work of the DILG is to look into the localization of the SDGs. So one example is the Roads to SDGs project that they implement through what we call the CMGP. CMGP is the Conditional Matching Grant Program. For example, DILG has this amount, the provincial government should put their counterpart funding in order to have a full pool of funding for this particular project. And this particular project should answer to any of the SDGs. This project uh, answers to 12 out of 17 SDGs. So it's not, as you may know, not all countries will get all the 17 sustainable development goals. It depends on their country priority. And in this case, with this project that I am involved in as an independent evaluator, they report to 12 out of 17 SDGs. And the provincial governments have to report specifically on the different SDG indicators, because there are different SDG indicators per SDGs. For example, SDG goal number 1 on extreme poverty. So there are different indicators. They have to specifically identify what indicator is being answered. So this is one example of a mechanism or a platform. So it involves not only the government, it involves the private sector and the civil society through the G hubs. And the G hubs doesn't only include NGOs but also universities in the local area. The universities will provide also technical support when it comes to engineers in the those who are studying engineering. They will also do their practicum or OJT in the roads to SDGs project. I'm referring literally to the roads, construction of roads, but that roads should answer to governance reforms, which is tied up to the SDG reforms. So I'm quite familiar with that because I'm currently doing it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your insights of your country cases and your organization. Can you kindly move on to the next question? Marcel, if you can, please.
Okay, so let's go to the next question. What partnerships, including with the private sector, have been put in place for implementation of the SDGs? So anybody who'd like to answer that?
Can I answer? I will try.
Okay, Sir Joel.
I'm from Department of Public Works in the Philippines, so the current administration, most of the Filipinos here are already known the Build project or the Build Back Better project of the President Duterte. And that partnership, Build project cannot sustain or realize success if without the partnership of the national government and the local government. Actually, the Build Back Better project composed of projects funded from local, from foreign assisted, and also from PPP, private-private partnership. So it goes to see that the combination of the three actors of government are there in that program, and we are tentatively targeting 9 trillion pesos for this build, and we've seen it already. We are slowly decongesting Metro Manila. We are connecting the whole spine of Luzon, and the private sector and the civil society are involved in that. On that, actually, every project before you commence a project, the study, the feasibility study and the detailed engineering design plan is been discussed with the private sectors and in the society and the community. So I think that partnership is manifested on these second questions. Actually, the Build Back Better of President Duterte involves the Department of Finance, Department of Budget and Management, the NEDA, the Office of the President, and the three infrastructure arms of government, which is the Department of Transportation, the Department of Public Works, and the BCDA. That's all.
Thank you, Sir Joel.
There is anybody else who would like to share their information or cases, can we perhaps maybe move on to the next question? Marcel, please.
Okay, so we go to the last question. how can governments take into account the views of multiple stakeholders in developing their plans for implementing the 2030 agenda? Perhaps I can answer in the case of the Philippines. So this is also related to what was shared earlier by Engineer Joal Hilario. Recently I saw like a link from the National Economic Development Authority. The NEDA of our country is the one that is leading the SDGs in relation to our Philippine Development Plan. Our Philippine Development Plan goes beyond the 2030 agenda. We call it Ambition 2040, our ambition until 2040. And the Ambition 2040 is linked to the SDG 2030 agenda. And recently, they have launched consultation through mobile platform like or social media platform like Facebook, that they would like to seek what will be the additions for the updating of the Philippine Development Plan, because it will be expired this year, because our last Philippine Development Plan was 2017 until 2021, which is this year. And now they are consulting the public to provide our inputs in the next Philippine Development Plan. So that's it. Thank you. Do you have more to add? What about the
hello? Hello?
Yes.
Molina from TNT. I'd like to just ask a question on the last part. Just in my country, I guess about 8 million people. But if you look at it, it's only 20% that's in the town, but we have the rest of the 80% population in the rural areas. What my question would be, can anyone, if you could kindly let me know, how could you get all the stakeholders together, their views on how to successfully implement 2030, because most of these the agendas that we put together are for the people, for the population. So if we cannot get them to participate, then we cannot really achieve the agendas. So I would like to ask the team if there's any way you think how we could make it work to get a holistic view of all stakeholders, so we can make our agenda that can work for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Molina. It would be appreciated if our group members could perhaps share their ideas to her through the chat. Actually, we have reached the end of the group discussion, so we will have to report back to the plenary. Before we do that, I would have to ask Maricel, would you be willing to summarize the points made here back in the plenary, or it is really up to you? I will just give you the opportunity. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. I have another meeting at 2:30, but I'm
no
not
problem.
so sure. I'm not so sure if I can I can stay, if it will go beyond the time. But I'm interested to to provide the feedback in the plenary. But the thing is, I'm tied up with another meeting at 2:30.
That is no problem. Okay, thank you. Let's move
you.
back to the plenary now.
Thanks.
About 20 minutes to have our or 15 minutes of our group discussion, right? And posted there are the 3 questions, and you already began by talking about what mechanisms and platforms are available for stakeholders from civil society and private sector to contribute to the implementation of SDGs. And I think you talk about the importance of information within the context of your book bank, if I understand you right. But anyway, what we shall do, dear friends, is we have a small group. Can we assign somebody to make the report for us later, and then see how we can begin by addressing these specific questions? I think we have about, if I'm not mistaken, 10 to 15 minutes to do this. So maybe what we'll do is address these 3 questions. What mechanisms and platforms? Number 2, what partnerships? And number 3, how can government take into account? Mr. Sahib already began by talking about possible mechanism. Hey, why don't we start your book bank, as he said? Okay. So how many do we have in the room today? You know, we have. So just go ahead and raise your hand, or just jump into the conversation. We have friends from all over the world, I think. No, we are from Korea, I guess. Tahir, is that you, Tahir? Sdg, where are you from? And then, yeah.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Yuri from Peru, but in this moment I in Seoul, Korea.
Oh, you're in Seoul. Okay, very good. So most of you are in Seoul right now. Milan.
Yeah.
Okay, Hamad, you're also from Seoul. Sharing. Okay, okay. So hi. Okay, Yuri there. I think I met you a long time ago. I'm not even sure if I did. But
yes, sir, I'm there.
Okay, so hi again. So our first question, we'll manage this. So Milan, maybe you could help me also manage our time. We have 3 questions. We have to assign somebody to make the report to the group, and equally important, let's just have a bullet points as far as this is concerned. In fact, we have a chat box there. What I would do if I were you, I'll go ahead and put some of our answers. Let's say, for what group are we? I forgot what group are we, but okay, is that all right with you guys? Because I know you don't have that much time. Milan, maybe you could help me, dear friend. Then we will, Milan, Stephen, I don't know, I'm just doing it at random, but you're smiling very broadly, so maybe you want to do it, of course, together with Yuri. Thank you very much for your beautiful smiles. So we'll ask one of you guys to do the reporting, okay? So the first question, dear friends, what mechanisms and platforms are available? So our friend Sahib already talked about the importance of a book bank. I think the importance there is really sharing information. We could do it through books, as you mentioned, but even through the internet, and even through this. Okay. So what mechanisms? Okay.
Well, in my opinion, I think it's very important to have a central portal or digital platform to share information with the civil society, no? Because in this kind of pandemic, it's very difficult to have a relationship face to face.
Yeah.
So maybe if we can implement a digital platform, we can share information, opinions with this kind of organizations.
Okay. So within the context of, I think, in relation to what Tahib mentioned, so I mentioned about.
Apart from it, I would like to add, sir. Apart from it, when we talk about leadership, we have to see, because leaders creates leaders. Okay? So we have to analyze what is the focus of our education system. Is it to create the education system? Is it for to create entrepreneurs, or is it guiding the students to get the jobs only? So what is the focus of the government? That is quite important as well.
Okay. So our questions are what mechanisms. The first was on information, book, information, digital platform, as pointed out by Yuri. And the second one is what, looking at the education system. Any other intervention or any other contribution? Thank you, Sahib. We already have 2. Anybody, dear friends? Yes, Paras?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Paras from Pakistan. I would like to just add few things that Pakistan is actually doing it on its own self, and we have a helix kind of a thing that has been introduced in the country, and we are working on a triple helix, but in fact it's been included as a quadruple helix now, which has been very active in the academic institutions, which includes the collaboration of academia, government, and private institutions, and the civil society. So I believe the best mechanism could be through the academia, because you have a exact and a direct, in fact, you have direct attention towards the students who come from the different backgrounds, from different grassroots levels. So I believe that academia is the best part, where you can encourage, enhance, and increase your approach. You can send your message directly to the grassroots level, to the people who are working, who are coming from different backgrounds. And I believe Pakistan has a national economic policy as well, which is, and we have a science, technology, innovation policy, which has been introduced in the country, and different local government bodies have different SDG units which are very proactive. But again, the outcome is not that efficient. We need to increase that outcome as well, and for that I believe the triple helix and the quadruple helix concept must be encouraged more, and we can have more beneficial benefits out of it if we have our academia strong, we have our research strong, we have PhDs, we have different research units. Especially if I talk about the academia, we have incubation centers here, when where people just come, interact, and share their ideas and help each other to come out of that poverty level, and to reach and encourage other people as well to get loans and get free fundings from the academia as well. So if we have these kind of a linkage, which is very, very important to believe, incorporate and to support this SDGs. So this will be the best mechanism that we will be having, and we will be definitely successful in having a successful entrepreneurship and other SDGs in the country through this triple and quadruple helix, which is playing their role. But I believe that there are some exceptions, and we need to improve that helix, especially in Pakistan, by focusing on higher education, on focusing on the role of academia and civil society, which is very, very efficient and very proactive these days, to believe that this would be the best mechanism to involve everyone, every citizen from the country, and to reach there and to send the message to their locals, especially.
Very nice. So I think that that reinforces Tahib's question about the importance of education. Yeah, and you talk about the role of academia, and you even said higher education. Great, great.
Yes, so Higher Education Commission.
Yeah, we now have two: information, education. Maybe we can go to the next question, then come back to that. How about that, guys?
Yeah.
Is that okay with you folks? So we're talking about what mechanisms, and we have identified two major mechanisms. But information, the book bank, digital platform, education, academia, education. The purpose of education, is it to create entrepreneurs, or, as you pointed out, for them to get people to be involved? And you talk about higher ed. Great. Is that okay with you folks? What if we go to the next question, then later on we'll go back to the first question if we have time. Okay. So the second question. Thank you very much, Paras and Sahib. Great. What partnerships, including the private sector, partnerships have been put in place for implementation of SDGs? So our own experience, have there already been partnerships in your respective countries? I know we have some friends from Mozambique. I think we have some questions here from Korea, or, what partnerships have been put in place for implementation of SDGs? Because we all know it's not only government, it's government with other partners. Question, what partnerships have been in place based on your own experience? Oh, Elida. Oh, we just have 5 more minutes. Any partnership then? Okay.
My name is Milan.
Yes, Milan, please.
Okay, from Malaysia. Okay, for the second question, I think most of the thing that do in Malaysia currently is because pandemic teach us a lot of things about a new norm in giving teaching to other kids. For example, through online. So there are a lot of organizations among even individual commitment to give a free tuition. And for example, a student from university, they give a free tuition to other students that need help, that cannot afford to get the fee. So but that one is but currently the challenges is not everyone know or aware about the free education and SDG. So maybe the thing that we can do is there are so many people that want to give a free tuition, but maybe we can later what we can suggest that is giving more information about the UN, about the SDG goal, then involve them to give a free tuition for the 2030 agenda.
So partnership there would be within the context of government providing free tuition to the academic community. So it's still part of what was mentioned by Paras earlier about the importance of academia. There's a note here from Elida who says, hey, we have only about 5 minutes left. So at least we have one already in terms of partnerships. Thank you, Milan. This is really ridiculous because big discussion, short time. But that's the way it is. Partnerships, Milan talked about the importance of education again within the context of government making it available, free tuition also, okay? Could we try for the third question, dear friends?
Okay.
I hope you guys are okay. Huh? Hamad, do you mind answering or Tashring?
For the second question also, there is not only in academic, there are some shopping malls that are provide free food, which is a center. It's like a food bank. But this one is anyone they can buy something from shopping mall, and then for example they can put it in the center. Then anyone that need it can get it by himself.
Okay. So also in terms, especially today in the pandemic, you're talking about making available free food. So it's also government and business. Business, free food, put it there, but only for those who need it. Of course. Yeah, because some people might go there. Especially when I was a graduate student, I would do that. No, I would not do that. Okay, let's go to the third part. How can governments take into account the views of multiple stakeholders in developing their plans? Can you see the three questions? So we've answered number 1, number 2, and maybe, I don't know, I need a volunteer later to make the report, and I will support you, of course. But the third is, how can governments take into account the views of multiple stakeholders? There's so many stakeholders out there. I think the question is, how can the government take their views into account in developing their plans for implementing agenda? I think this is within the context of participation.
Maybe.
Of course, Cynthia, please, Cynthia.
Please, Cynthia.
Where are you from, Cynthia?
Yes, my name is Cynthia Mutinda. I come from Kenya, from
Okay.
Nairobi City.
Okay.
Yeah.
What?
So
Okay.
my proposal would be the government should be able to bring them together into a centralized point, like they can have a policy for all the participants, whereby they can be able to note down their ideas, their suggestions, and then they bring them together, collaborate, and be able to bring out the best that the best out of all these suggestions and ideas. For also the ownership, that they can be able to own these ideas and the project and be able to move with them, having owned them to implement them. Thank you.
No, but I'll push the envelope. It's nice, government bring them together, but how can government bring them together? How?
I think they can have a central point, like a central organ. They instruct in a structure, whereby they have central point and then cascading down to the grassroots. They'll be able to get the information from the grassroots through the structure.
Okay, good. So you're saying the policy should be there, but government should bring them together, as you said. Thank you very much. Any other?
I would like to add a bit more.
Yeah, Sohaib, please.
Sohaib from Pakistan. So I would like to add a bit more.
Please go ahead. Before they cut us out.
Am I audible?
Yeah,
Am
you
I
are.
audible?
The third, yes, the third question. How can governments take into account the views?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would like to add, first of all, we have to review the directions, that moving fast but in the wrong direction, can we manage manage the results? Definitely not. First of all, we have to see the directions, in which directions you are moving. We have to review the paths. We have to review the past paths and the current paths. And then we have to streamline the directions, because moving fast but in the wrong direction, you cannot achieve excellence and can never maximize results.
Okay, so this is a continuous review of what we're doing. I think that's a very nice point. We can be moving, but hey, are we moving in the right direction? So it's really a continuous self-evaluation, right? Are we hitting our targets? I think so. How can governments take into account the reply of Sohaib? Hey, why don't we continuous review, continuous evaluation of where we are, monitoring and evaluation. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you very much.
I would also like to add some point into it.
Yes, please. Who is that? I'm sorry. Yes,
I would
Farah.
like to add both the questions. I would like to answer both the questions, second and third. Well, this is very important. Public-private partnerships are very important, especially for a developing country like Pakistan. We are actually doing it in some or other institutions. We have different institutions that are providing fundings to the other private institutions or government institutions as well. Say, for example, if we have a banking sector, we have different regulatory bodies which have been helped, aided, supported by other private organizations, and they collaborate and work each other for trainings and other educational programs that they give different kinds of trainings with the help of and aid of and support of different private institutions in the country. So this is happening, which is very, in fact, marginalized. I would say that it is very much on the low level, which must be increased. Its range must be increased. And how it may be increased, I believe there are 3 Ds which actually are working in all the countries. We have democracy, development, and defense. We have these 3 mechanisms which we need to focus, especially I would talk about Pakistan, my own country. We need to work on it, and we need to collaborate each and every factor which is working in the country. And how it is possible, I believe it is only possible with some good sort of a special unit which is made for the coordinated activities. We have policies, we have science technology policies, we have regulatory bodies. All we need to do is implement it, work with it, and activate the actual bodies with the actual causes which are been ignored somehow or other. So how can government do it? Is government has the best platform, that is the civil society, the NGOs, the social medias. We can take help from them, and we can ask them to develop. Say, for example, if we just have a last year in COVID, it was a very worse situation. So in Pakistan, it was complete lockdown. So the government introduced a portal, and through that portal, different NGOs to cater to give the portion of rations and other basic necessities to each and everyone at their doorsteps. Government has all the data information of each and every individual in the country. So they developed a portal in which they asked people to come and register themselves. They asked the NGOs, civil societies, and all other people who are working for the civil rights to register themselves and make a centralized mechanism that they can help and reach each and every poor, not multiple times to the same person, and they can increase their outreach. So in banking sector, I believe Pakistan has different public-private partnerships, and they are working very efficiently on giving trainings and helping them to increase the banking inclusion in Pakistan. So this same thing can be replicated in all other institutions working here, in maybe large organizations, also the small organizations, also the academia, also these different what we have, commerce, chamber of commerce is working in Pakistan. So the same model can be replicated to all other institutions who are working here. So I believe that there can be a single portal which we can make and ask people to come and collaborate on that same platform, come up with their ideas and help them where they are needed. And we have different regulatory bodies who are actually working on it as well. They have State Bank of Pakistan has created some of programs which are asking them to bring such public partnerships on the mainstream and main ground. So this could be, in my view, this could be the best possible way out to bring some portals, engage the civil society, which has a good grip in the grassroots level, that will help us to spread our message more.
I think you reinforce exactly what Cynthia just said about government leading the way, providing the enabling framework. So you talk about your treaties, democracy, development, and defense. I think within the context of the development, government leads the way, but equally important, we go back to what we talked about in the first question, the importance of information, and you talk about the importance of creating a portal. Equally important, that will provide the enabling framework for partnerships with the business sector, something I think that was mentioned also earlier by Yuri, about that. So I think, you know, I was just told we don't have that much time. So can we have somebody to volunteer? I will help you put it together, and can somebody help this? But just to summarize, whoever will volunteer, the first question was earlier, the importance of information, through book bank, digital platform, educational system, academia. Second question, what are the partnerships? We talk about the importance of partnership with the private sector. That's what Milan mentioned, including business, free education, no? And then third, also the importance of the government taking the lead, but not only that, it has to be important partnership. And the third part, what partnerships have been done or what mechanisms. Paras mentioned training, you mentioned that, the development, and of course, the importance of, going back to what we started about earlier, importance of information. Okay, so any volunteer to make the presentation? I'm either looking at Yuri or Milan. I'm sorry, because you guys look very active. Would you like to make either of you?
I think Paras have a good
Paras,
idea.
would you like to do it?
Yeah.
I think Paras, Paras
It's unanimous. Paras, let's go through that. Thank you very much. Yeah, but those three aspects, I think. So I think it's and I will just supplement it. No, the importance of information, education, higher education also mentioned, academia, and then the importance of partnership with the private sector, including Milan's question. Very simple. In the mall, and give them food banks. Yeah, but it should be the real people, not like us graduate students. I'm again. Then you know, I was a graduate student once, so I know how it is to be a graduate student. Sometimes we run out of food. Anyway, Cynthia mentioned the importance of government centralized, no, in terms of training program, and Sahab, Prabhas, meant about the mention of training programs. You left us with two very nice things: your 3Ds and your triple helix. So very good, very good. Okay, guys, congratulations. Let's give. Can everybody turn on their camera? Can everybody turn on your camera? No, Aida, come on. How about you guys? I'll just take a picture of you guys. Okay, everybody smile. Can everybody turn on your camera? Elida, Chering, Tahir. Oh, they're very shy. I'll just take a picture of you guys. Smile, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more. Okay, very shy. Chering from Bhutan. Hello, how are you? So thank you very much, Paras, and you're such an intelligent person, and I'll just back you up when we go back to the plenary hall.
Thank you so much.
Are you in Bhutan, Chering? Are you in Bhutan, Chering, or are you in Korea?
In my case, I am in Seoul.
Oh, you're also in Seoul. Oh, because I like what you're wearing. I love your country. I love your gross national happiness. Okay, Chering, Paras, yeah? Are you guys all from Seoul right now? Paras, are you also in Seoul right now?
No, I'm from Pakistan.
Okay, thank you very much. So nice to meet you guys. I hope someday I'll meet you.
Same here.
So I'll tell them that we're ready, yeah? Oh, Tahir's phone. Too much to everyone.
So I am from Pakistan too.
Oh, good, Tahir. How are you? Did you take a picture?
I'm from.
Good to meet you.
Yeah.
I invited some of my Philippine. I think those are the three simple areas, right? Paras? Hey, Paras, while we're waiting, what are the elements of the triple helix?
You want me to tell about triple helix?
No, just tell us while you're waiting. I know the double helix, but I've heard of triple
helix. Actually,
yeah,
it's been enhanced now. It was double helix before, but now it's been quadruple helix. And it's actually, there are, so 4 pillars which are which make the basis of any society, that is academia and the government and private institutions, also including the civil sector these days. So Pakistan is working on this sector a lot, and there are a lot of researches done on triple helix and quadruple helix nowadays. The universities have been given special tasks for public-private partnerships and to research work and coordinate with different activities. We have different incubation centers and research centers in every university almost that have their different research portfolios. We encourage people to come up with different entrepreneurial ideas. They give fundings to them as well. And through linking it with the other private institutions, they help which is very nominal. I believe it's still, it is still achievable to have more goals in it, but it is still nominal in state of numbers. If we say that we haven't achieved our targets completely, but I believe it's a right path, and we have at least been focused on the right direction. All we need to do is just kickstart, go ahead and work on it, but the conditions here in Pakistan, especially after COVID, the economic conditions are again vulnerable. So there are a lot more factors that are affecting that helix, which we are trying to just normalize them for some information kind of a thing, but practically they cannot be ignored. We have different economic crunches here. We have, due to COVID, there are different factories which have been deregularized. So there are some other issues which we need to cater along with this all triple and quadruple helix scenario.
Fantastic.
I think the session is going to be.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but could we please go back to the main room?
Section. So maybe if we agree, or if there is a volunteer, one could volunteer as a group leader or the rapporteur who will summarize the ideas and report back based on the discussions we're going to have. I hope it's in order. Who is volunteering or who will want to nominate a colleague? I think there is noise from somebody's background. If there is noise from your background, could you kindly mute your mic if you are not speaking at this time? Yeah. I know we have about 16 participants in our group. Let's make it lively. Who may want to report back? Just based on this, you are not supposed to report everything in detail. Just get the key ideas. What are the responses from colleagues, and what are the things you want to? You may choose not to report back. Maybe just gather it together for ourselves. Okay, whilst we're waiting, can we just proceed with the questioning, or based on our experience? There's no right answer. There isn't any right or wrong answer. All answers are right as far as because this is supposed to be an opportunity to share our experience and share ideas and look at ways to be able to further implement or promote the implementation of the SDGs. So the first one is what mechanisms or platforms are available for SD or for stakeholders, that's from civil society, private sector, to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs. We know there are stakeholders in our societies, in our countries, in our organizations, or based on our experiences. But what are the mechanisms or platforms available? We could just share, maybe in my country, we have it this way, or based on my experience, we have it this way. How do we mobilize this stakeholders together? Are they able to come together, and what are the platforms available for them to? Yes, Mr. Mashud.
It's a good question. Are you listening, me?
Yeah, we're hearing. It seems there's a bit of noise, but we are hearing.
Okay. I would like to share an example of my country. There is an NFC award system in Pakistan. We have 220 million people in our country, and it is divided in 4 provinces like Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, and KPK. There is a meeting of common interest every year where the financial matters or the financial resources are distributed among all the provinces, right? And the stakeholders are the CMs of that province, the chief minister of that province. Whenever there is a common interest issue, each province leader or CM is invited and a meeting is conducted so that they can represent the nation or province people at a whole, and they can acquire as much resources as they needed for the province. But that NFC award is entirely dependent upon the population, number of population in that province. The NFC award means the National Financial Awards of Finance Awards, sorry, are distributed basing upon the population. Suppose in Punjab there is 120 million people living, and our total resources of the country are distributed accordingly. This is the example of in our country available for the engagement of stakeholders in SDGs.
Okay. Thank you so much for such a revealing point, especially. So in this case, we find that there is a mechanism, which is through meetings. There's this laid down procedure where these provinces come together to meet, to discuss as to how they are going to work together and promote the implementation of or development, which falls under the purview of the SDGs. Can we have any other example from another colleague? Or I should mention names. I know we are not in classroom, but let's make it interactive. Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I can hear you.
By the way, I'm Robbie Palsef here from Philippines.
All right.
Of Dr. Brillantes students. I don't know
great.
if the experience or the thought that I will be sharing would fall onto question number 1 or number 2. But what
Yeah,
is
you can just proceed.
here in Philippines, especially in the healthcare system that we have, once the WHO or the United Nations provides us these sustainable development goal activities, and at the same time, what are those things that need to be achieved? What the Department of Health usually is doing is they incorporate or they inject those targets in terms of activities to be abided or to be done by the both private and government institution, healthcare institution. Like for example, the reduction of maternal death and mortality rate here and here, or as we can see on the SDG and both also in the MDG goal. What the Department of Health did is they do a policy to reduce or some activities to be done for that goal to be achieved. So that's, I think, one of the example or mechanism that the government or way of the government to involve the civil society and private sector to come and join in the implementation of such goal.
Okay. Thanks so much too for another very insightful point, especially the mechanism of incorporating these SDGs into the institutional frameworks and activities. And I think
in addition, sir, if I may, our last 2019 Philippines had already passed the Universal Healthcare Law, which mandated the government to cover or to have financial coverage to all Filipinos. And I think one of the SDG goal, if I'm not mistaken, number 3 is universal health coverage, which just started last 2019. So it involves not only the government to roll out that project, but also with the collaboration of the private entities or civil society and private sector.
Excellent. That's another very promising point. Yes.
As you pointed in your first point, you explained that Philippine government, sorry?
Yes, sir, from Philippines.
Okay, you state that your government has done a great job in mortality rates in order to reduce the mortality rate. What is the example of stakeholder participation at local level in this health issue?
Okay, some of the activities or the Department of Health had done is licensing some birthing homes, and at the same time they involve those birthing homes in the accreditation of those birthing home, not also on the healthcare institution, but the healthcare professional that will attend the delivery, because prior to the accreditation and licensing of some of the maternity institutions here, the facility-based delivery is very low. So it can cause maternal death because some of the attendants of those women who give birth are not professional or healthcare professional. And on that case, when Philippines had licensed some of the birthing home, and at the same time they also, or PhilHealth or the health insurance here, they accredit also those healthcare institution. And once you have a PhilHealth or the National Health Insurance Program, they also involve the National Health Insurance Program. And if you're part of the National Healthcare or National Health Insurance Program, what the government did is to pay the delivery for the mother. So it will encourage them to deliver on a facility-based institution or maternal institution. So in that case, the maternal death will be reduced, and also with the compliance of the mother in terms of the prenatal checkup, and same with the neonatal death. So that's sake, the government don't just carry the program itself, but also involve the private sectors, especially healthcare institution, by licensing them, by incentivizing them through the National Health Insurance Program. And in that case, it reduces the mortality and morbidity rate of women and newborn.
Mr. Samuel, with your permission, I can add something to this point.
Yeah.
A very good example, as reported by Robbie. In Pakistan, there is a very organized mechanism of health system. Each district is divided in DHQ, district health quarter, and after that there is a tehsil health quarter. And after that, at local community, when there is a population of 1,000 or 2,000 in one specific area, there is BHU, basic health unit, where every facility is available for birth centers and polio vaccinations and other 12 diseases are covered in those BHUs, where local community, local doctor is assisted by a federal government or provincial government, and they are being proper equipped, and well-trained doctors are available. Even each 1,000 population of country, BHU is designed for that.
Okay, I think these are very great examples from the two countries. I know we all have other examples, but especially I just want us to know there's a platform for us to learn as peers. So we want to promote peer-to-peer learning. And one had been that, especially in addition to the Philippines one, we get to know that governments involve these people by promoting licensing of these programs, so that this private sector or local people, like private organizations, are able to participate. There is also this idea as a form of incentivizing them. So this is another way or mechanism that helps to promote this. And our brother has also talked about this policy area of in the health delivery system. So I think we've just cut across the first and second, but maybe to make it more specific, what partnership, is there some specific partnerships that exist in our countries? Maybe there is a program, maybe an infrastructure program, especially in the area of maybe poverty alleviation, or in the area of healthcare, or in the area of environment that has been put in place to implement SDGs, especially bringing the stakeholders together. Is there an example? And maybe if you want to just go straight to the third one too, how has government taken into the account of the views of other multi-stakeholders in developing plans, especially based on our experience or also based on what we have in our countries or organizations? Anybody can say something? Maybe there's a healthcare or a particular program. Yes, speaking.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
You can continue. Yes.
I'm Sadaf Rana from Pakistan.
Okay.
For this for question number one, I want to say that in private sector they have their corporate responsibilities toward the society. If corporate sector, private sector provide employment opportunities to women's and safe environment to women's, it will not only upgrade their financial and economic condition, standard of living. It will also help the entire family of that woman who is not that much educated, who don't have so much financial resources. So the private sector can contribute in the implementation of SDGs by providing employment opportunities to the women in the remote areas where there are not too much of employment opportunities. I have an example from my village that garment factory set up their production unit near villages, and they only give they provide transportation, and they provide job opportunities to the women of the surrounding villages, which not only help those women to upgrade their living standard, but they also it also help the entire family of each woman. Moreover, civil societies, these societies work with very marginalized people, and they have data in bulk quantities. They can help. They can coordinate with governments to indicate those areas which are not having all these facilities like water, clean water and sanitation. With on the root levels, we can their experiences, their data can help the government to target those areas and to upgrade their to upgrade these areas. Sorry.
Yeah, continue. Sorry, I just wanted to.
Okay. So as these two areas, like civil societies and private sectors, they can really help to uprise the living standards of the people, eliminate the poverty. They can also empower the women of these areas who are not educated enough to get good jobs. So creating opportunities for those women's, those families which are not that much educated, and they cannot have highly qualified jobs.
Brilliant. Yeah, great. I think you brought another perspective to this, where these platforms, not just coming from government, but these other people in the private sector or the CSOs can also take initiatives as a way of engaging with government to implement the SDGs. And you specifically mentioned that creating job opportunities is another platform or mechanism to engage with government and other key stakeholders. And even having programs that deliver public services to especially the marginalized in society is another way these partnerships are built, and also we get to have these platforms to engage with stakeholders. Yes, thank you very much for your excellent points you provided. Who speaks next? Should I mention name? If I see your name, should I just mention?
Hi Samuel, this is Liza from Makati City, Philippines.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Hi. Well, I'd like to speak first before you call my name, so just I'm more prepared.
Yes,
no,
yes.
Well, basically, I represent the local government. I work for the Disasters Reduction and Management Office of Makati City Government, and as we know, there is really a nexus between SDGs and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, particularly on SDG Target 11. And so I'd like to focus my contribution on this specific target or goal. And to contextualize it in the Philippines. So here in the Philippines, we do have the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, which is basically the major private sector vehicle and coordinator of the country for disaster management. And this specific organization actually provides various services in specifically to local governments affected by disasters. So their services cover livelihood opportunities, they cover quick recovery, they cover they actually even cover disaster preparedness activities. So basically what I'm saying is that in the case of the Philippines, we do have a formal structure where the involvement of the private sector can actually happen, not only in the implementation of SDGs, but also in the other international frameworks that we have right now. And I think at the local level, if I may also just go down to the local government where I belong, this specific formal structure or formal mechanism is also in place. We do have our local special bodies. We call it local special bodies. And for instance, in the case of Makati, we do have a Makati City Development Council, which basically is composed of the different organizations, different agencies within the city government with representation from the private sector and the civil society organizations, together with the members of the community, the elected officials of the communities or the barangays or the villages. And, you know, together we plan and we program development initiatives. And as we know, at the local level, and the Philippines being one of the countries who pledged for support of the implementation of SDGs, all of this, you know, nationally required indicators for us to regularly assess our contribution to the SDG progress of the country. It's actually the Makati City Development Council who discuss these things, and that as a local special body becomes a venue for participation of the private sector and the civil society organization. Thank you.
Madam Lisa,
Thank you so much too.
As you said that local government and given some examples, my question is how your local government sectors are contributing to national objective?
Well, actually, the national, if I just heard it right now, because there's some echo, but I think you're asking about how the local government contribute to the national government's progress towards SDG, right? Okay, so basically, well, I think it all boils down to the system or the governance structure of the Philippines, because everything is so decentralized in the Philippines. You know, primary services are very decentralized. So many of the targets of the SDGs are actually being taken care of by the local government. So whatever program that we develop or we come up with, and whatever program we implement, for example, in the healthcare system, in maybe public safety or disaster reduction and management, since these are all decentralized services, from national to local government, we do have a direct alignment and direct contribution to the overall implementation of SDGs in the country.
Very nice. Good. Thank you.
Okay, I want to again thank Liza for providing us with another very new perspective, especially with the institutional mechanisms in place. So in the case of the Philippines, she highlighted there's this private sector coordinating vehicle that helps. So we get to learn how it's helping. Then at a local level or local government level, this transcends to include local development councils. And these are institutions that help to promote the local engagement with the civil societies and also private sector organizations. I think this has been a great time together, and we've really had I know many of us had ideas and maybe we just thought it was okay, but I would like to thank all those who provided. We are running out of time, so that's what I just want to summarize. And if you have any other additional points, you could submit it through the chat box. But I want to use this opportunity to thank you all for providing us this very insightful inputs from Pakistan. We had two, and also from the Philippines, and all those points we had together. And I think this has been a very fruitful discussion, and I look forward to your participation in the next session. Thank you very much again, and see you soon. Bye.
So if I may invite one or two from your group to share your discussion, outcome of your discussion in plenary. Is there anyone who can volunteer? Please.
Any volunteer?
Any volunteer from any group?
Okay, any group. Can I volunteer you, Paras? We had a very nice discussion. We had a very happy discussion, our group, Yuri and the rest of the guys. Okay, I'm not being presumptuous, but anyway.
Oh, maybe Dr. Alex, you can start your group discussion, outcome of your group discussion.
Okay,
No,
I would like to.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yes.
I would like to conclude all the group discussion we had with Doctor. And my name is Paras and I'm from Pakistan. We were discussing about all these three questions, which were that how important are these public-private partnerships, and what are the outcome challenges, and what better government can do to increase those the partnerships here. So we have received some good valuable insights from Yuri and other members, Sohaib and other members who have actively participated. They asked, they gave some suggestions about the book bank, that we can include some of the mechanism, like where we share each and every kind of resources what we have about SDGs and other important materials, that we can create some book bank, a library kind of a thing which is online, and we can share each and every piece of information about SDGs, and we can communicate it through that portal or through that mechanism to each and every individual in the grassroots level. So this was a good suggestion from the discussion. Secondly, we were discussing about the public-private partnerships, which are possible only through the encouraging and formulating the triple helix mechanism in the country, which is now been extended to quadruple helix, and the helix consists of all the four main pillars of the society, which are civil society, academia, government, and private sector. In Pakistan, I gave some examples. We are working on it. There are different academic institutions who have been assigned these goals to work for the triple helix or quadruple helix mechanism. They are working on public-private partnership researches. They have incubation centers who are providing different kind of platforms to the people who are coming from different backgrounds with some ideas. They give them trainings, basic trainings, and basic seed fundings to incorporate in their own ideas and businesses. So we believe public-private partnership is still very nominal in sense of a developing country, which is very important. In Pakistan, there are different public-private partnership examples, especially in banking sector. They are working together. They have their different regulatory systems, so they are working together for giving trainings to the people and increasing their inclusion in the banking sector. But this is still nominalized. This is still very marginal in terms of numbers, if we say. So this can be done by the help of government if they have a single portal. In Pakistan, we have different SDGs units in different institutions. All are there, but they are not that active. So we need to kickstart them. The discussion was all about the main 3 Ds that are democracy, development, and defense, which are the main source of channel that connects the country or connects some society. So we need to work on this partnership between democratic institutions, the development, which is purely done by the government, but they should be included, and they can be encouraged in the private sectors as well, and the defense mechanism of the country, which is almost very strong, but still we need to have a good communication and good linkage within these 3 Ds. Then again, we discussed about the HEC role of higher education commissions in all the countries, which is very the apex body to have different policies. We have different policies regarding the public-private partnership, science, technology, innovations, and other policies. So this was the all outcome that we had great discussions on the government. What can they do? The triple helix, the 3Ds, and academic portion of the partnerships, which again, the government is the main body which needs to initiate it through some portal, like the way they did in the COVID, when it was the country was hit by the COVID and everything was in the lockdown. Everything was centralized. Government had a portal where they shared their information regarding people who were deserving, who needed some help, some support, some basic rations, some basic materials to eat. So they had a mechanism channel that we provided each and every person here in Pakistan about the basic needs. So similar, this same model can be replicated to other institutions as well. The same kind of public-private partnerships, which is very on smaller level, can be increased and can be replicated and just made it mandatory throughout the different institutions here. So this was all in our discussions and was really interactive and fruitful. Inshallah, I hope that this may be helpful.
Thank you, Paras, for the comprehensive discussion and the comprehensive, the comprehensive statement you provided. So, is there any other group who wants to volunteer?
I would like to add a big, further wonderful session given by Paras. Thank you so much, Paras. Apart from it, I would like to add that we have to also review the paths, the directions of government sector universities and private sector universities, or the government or the private sector, the directions in which they are moving. If everyone is moving in different directions, we can never achieve excellence, nor we can maximize results. So first of all, the fundamental principle is that we have to be on the same path.
Right.
And we have to analyze our past trends and the current trends and the gap between it. What's the gap between it, inside it? Until or unless the gap is not reduced, we can never achieve excellence.
All right. Thank you, Sohaib, for your insights. So so if there is one more last volunteer who can give the discussion, what you have discussed. If not, then we'll go to question and answer session. Okay, we don't have any other volunteer. Okay, so now we'll start our Q&A session. So we have one question from Masood Ahmad Akhtar. Yes. Dr. Alex, I would like to ask, like what he asked, if we have scattered participants in policy making, stakeholder engagement in the implementation of SDGs in government sector, how can transparency, commitment, and accountability be ensured?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. No? Are we moving in the same? That's why we talk about whole of society, but more importantly, whole of government. And you are so right, Masood. If we have scattered participants in different directions, we are not moving in one direction. And I'd like to go to what Sohaib mentioned, importance of continuous monitoring and evaluation. Sohaib mentioned, hey, if we're moving in that direction, then we find out where. So I think it's very, very important to continuously monitor. I mean, it sounds so nice, leaving no one left behind. I mean, in terms of nice policies, it's all there. But I think continuous evaluation, re-examination of where we are, and reviewing where we are is very, very important. And you're sorry, but if you have scattered participants, you're sorry. That is where, in our paradigm, the importance of leadership. Praveen mentioned that also, and so did our friend Adrian Alberti. Leadership is important, my friends. We should not romanticize participation. Sure, participation is very, very important. But if your participation in all directions, where will you go? Hence, leadership is very, very important. Remember the example I showed you of, I think that was Thailand. They talk about the importance of centralized leadership coupled with decentralized participation. It's really, I guess you might call it kind of a helix too, to borrow Paras's word, no? But how does one combine it? How does one? And that is why, as Sohaib mentioned, We have to continue monitoring and evaluating where we are. You're talking no one left behind, but if you step out, there's so many have been left behind. So you can only have nice figures, but if you don't critically, underscore critically, if we don't critically examine ourselves, nothing will happen. And that's why maybe we are where we are today. I think for me, very, very important is critical attitude. That's why I talk about the importance of changing the mindsets, even of those in government. I'm from the government, but sometimes we in the government just do things because there are things the way they have been done before. No, excuse me. We should continue looking at ourselves and are we really reaching our target participants? Let's be critical. Otherwise, what will happen to the vulnerable? Our children, and most important, our children's children. Most of you are very young, but hey, we should think of the next generation. That is what equity, intergenerational equity is all about. The question is for whom? For whom are the sustainable development goals? It's not for us, guys. It's for those 2030, 2040. We won't be here. So monitor. Thank you very much for that excellent question, Masood.
Thank you, Dr. Alex. Is there any other question from the participant? Please, you can ask any one of us. Is there any other question?
I have a question. I have a question.
Actually,
Hello.
I put.
Okay, Yuri just uploaded one question. There is another question. Where is the balance between whole of government approach and decentralization? The more you decentralize, the whole of government may be affected. So how we achieve the balance? Dr. Alex, you are in better position to answer this question, I guess.
That's an excellent question about the balance between, it's really, that's why I talk about phronetic. That's why I talk about practical wisdom. You cannot romanticize central government. You cannot romanticize local. How do you do that? Because at the end of the day, we're all part of whole of government. There are times when national government should take the lead, but local government, decentralization should implement. I go back, many examples, but since we just finished it, the example of Thailand, they talk about the centralized leadership, but strong community participation. It is possible, But how does government provide that enabling framework? And that's the balance that Mr. Abiyut mentioned. The more you decentralize, the whole of government may be affected. But you know what? When you decentralize, those at the local level realize that they're all part of the same ship. The problem is if you bifurcate it. No, we are in one planet together. Remember the 4 Ps. We are a planet. There's no national, there's no local. We're together because if the planet collapses, hey, all of us collapse. End of story. And that's what SDG is all about. SDG is not only for one country. SDG, and if you don't mind my saying, I think all of us want to talk about SDG because we are in the same planet. That's why there should be that's why I talk about the importance of practical wisdom, phronesis. In the picture I showed you have Aristotle pointing up and Plato pointing down. How do you achieve practical wisdom? That's why we're here together. How do you balance centralization, decentralization? We cannot romanticize. That's why we must not romanticize. Thank you for that question, Mr. Abiyut. I think Yuri also had a question. Will you read it, Prabir?
Yeah, so from my side, okay, I'll give you a short answer for this one. How can the economies use ICT and digital technologies or digital government to integrate local and national government in order to implement the SDGs? So, this driving like how ICTs can accelerate the SDGs is a good question, and I think we need to use you can see from the perspective of the current COVID-19 pandemic, how ICTs and digital government are using, the government are using ICTs and digital technologies to combat this COVID-19 pandemic. So especially for the local level, the national government need to provide those kind of infrastructure first, not only just saying in the paper or they need to provide the infrastructure, and as well as for also from the start of the beginning, they need to be engaged. National and local level governments should be engaged in from the start, not from national government are planning something else, and local government are not aware of this kind of thing. So they need to know from the beginning. And there are lots of ICT contribution to the SDGs, like open data increases the transparency, empower and citizen, and drives economies and growth. And also we can say financial inclusion, like mobile access to financial service for the whole of people, like in the local level. And there are lots of other ICT technologies like e-agriculture, e-health, e-learning, and smart water. This kind of thing we need to know from the very beginning, for not for only for the national level, but for also local level. Dr. Alex, do you have anything to add on this one?
In fact, for me, again, one of the things I'm doing here is critical perspective. Number two, do not romanticize. All of us talk about the importance of digital, ICT. Hey, but you know what? The digital divide, as we are bridging the digital divide, we're actually widening it, because there are countries, areas in this world that even don't have electricity. They don't have internet. And here I'll talk about the digital. Leaving no one left behind. I think that's an excellent example of how many are actually being left behind. Because as you know, digitalization is exponential. But how about those who even don't have electricity, don't have internet? So as a matter of fact, the paradox of digitalization is that as we are bridging it, we're actually widening it. And we should address that. I raised this point during the Committee of Experts of Public Administration, I think 2 years ago at the United Nations. Yes, it's good. Digitalization, good instrument. But I think let's practice what we preach. People are being left behind. I know even in the Philippines, there are areas here that do not even have access to internet, but others are way up there. And it's not only in the Philippines, because we're a middle-income country. How about those in others who even don't have electricity? Are you kidding? So I think we should not romanticize things. It's very, very important that we should continue to be critical about this. But yes, so it's an answer, but it can be the problem also. Sorry.
No problem. That's why Hello?
Hello. I would like to add the point of Dr. Alex. He rightly pointed out that there are several countries where there is issue of electricity and basic necessities. How can we come the concept of digitalization in such sort of countries? But my question pertains to this phenomenon, as Dr. Alex stated. The UN should adopt the equalization policy of distribution of resources in all over the countries. They prefer the G20 countries, the Grand 20 countries, and all the resources move towards them. The forces protect those countries, whereas the countries which are developing or underdeveloped countries, there is no such policies of UNO available in those countries. There should be equalization from UNO in all countries all over the world.
I agree with you.
Yeah, Dr. Alex, you have the floor.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to monopolize, but I agree with you, Masood. Definitely. So is this where stronger, united, quote unquote, third world countries come together? Perhaps. Because right now, as you just pointed out, the whole thing might be dominated by those in the advanced countries, Hey, but that's the whole dynamic. Well, we all are familiar with the center-periphery phenomenon that exists up to today. That's why my question is, for whom? For whom is this? But I agree with you. I think my internet might not be that strong, but I agree with you. That I think Sohaib put it very well. A continuous monitoring, evaluation, and equally important. It's important for us to also assert ourselves. All of us are familiar with the so-called third world countries, if you may, the so-called non-aligned countries. This was a discourse even when I was in graduate school a long time ago, and the dynamic between the rich and the poor continues up today, not only globally, but even within our societies, my friends. I'm sure some of you might have heard of this writer named Wallerstein, under Gunder Frank. It's really a question of power. Question for whom? Now we're beginning to realize we're all part of this whole globe. No one should be left behind, and that is that's why I pointed out the HDR, Human Development Report. Please read it, and when you read it, hey, we are destroying ourselves, the Anthropocene. It's good for us to read the Human Development Report, and as Noam Chomsky once mentioned, one of my favorite books, as Noam Chomsky once mentioned, we might be in for extinction of humanity. You know, this is really an existential threat. You're talking about nuclear war, you're talking about the climate change, and now we're talking about pandemic. We can be talking about digitalization, everything, but in the meantime, what's happening? Existential threat. We should be aware of this. In fact, we should be fearful. That's why I talk about the fact that, hey, let's think of the next generation. And that's what SDG is all about. And part of this, I'll shut up after this, probably, the question of power. Center, periphery, developed, underdeveloped. Let's work together. Otherwise.
Okay, I would just like to, sorry to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but with all this discussion which is going on, I agree to it to fully extent that there is a difference between developed countries and underdeveloped countries, of course. So what brings the crux that the goal and the main theme of the SDGs, which is not implementable? If we speak about the differences, there are a lot more differences around the world. How can SDG link or bind or legally bind the economies to work on this pattern in every country, which is very different from each other? You see, every country has their own economic challenges. Every country that has their own neighboring challenges, their interior challenges, exterior challenges. So SDGs in fact, it was a question from me, and it has been highlighted with this discussion that we are talking about the SDGs all around. Then what the SDGs are doing or may help globally, when we talk about it, that the United Nations is working for the SDGs around the world, when the world is so different, when the countries are so different, how these development goals are linking, are legally binding to the economies to aid their own governments, to aid their own people, and then they work abroad, you know, then they work outside of their boundaries. So this makes SDGs questionable. A different pattern to this this approach, I would say, that there should be some mechanism which we may equalize, which may have similar approaches towards each and every nation, which is having different kind of challenges in itself. So this is questionable to the SDGs theme itself.
I think,
so
next there is a representative of Journa who is here. I think he should answer this question in detail. What Journa is doing for equalization for all over the world in countries.
I'm sorry, I didn't get it so well. You're very garbled. But you were seconding the question of Paras, right? One is, you are so right about SDGs. I think let's just look at the record. We were talking about Rio, Agenda 21. We were talking about MDG. Now we're talking about SDG. Point, how far are we moving towards that direction? Okay, so progress hasn't exactly been that good. And as pointed out by us, you know, a little critical perspective. But at the same time, dear friends, we have no business being critical unless we provide alternatives. That is what we're doing today. Sure, we have the right to be critical, but we have no right to be critical unless we provide some kind of alternatives. And what we did today was providing alternative. You talk about communication in our small group. You talk about higher education. You talk about development. I think that's right. And we continue this discussion. I think, and what we're doing today is really saying, hey, we are not yet there. It's difficult for us to be there because of this pandemic, etc. And we might not even hit it in 2030, but we should do something about it. That's why I was saying we should be disturbed. And that's what HDR is all about. We should be disturbed, not for ourselves, but for the vulnerable and for the children. And what should we do? Question, at our level, in our homes, how many of us are sorting our garbage? How many of us are sorting our plastic? How many of us are involved in cleaning the environment? See, go down to the individual level. Go down to your homes, to your neighborhoods. In my own subdivision, we talk about that. Because it cannot be talking about that level, but if in our community, changing our mindsets is very, very important, because nothing will happen. It can be very ideal, but if we do not change our behavior, including people in the bureaucracy. I'm from the bureaucracy and I know that. Sometimes we just do things because that's the way things have been done. But no, we should be much, much, much more critical, because, hey, we're talking about the age of the Anthropocene, and we're talking about the age of possible mass extinction. And I think we should discuss that. And that's in the HDR. Point, it has been recognized. It has been recognized by the Human Development Report. That's why I start my presentation by also quoting the HDR. So thanks for that very important question to Dr. to Masood and also to Paras. This whole notion of it's not business as usual, but we ourselves at our level, how many of you guys are sorting trash? How many of you are involved? Of course, you know what I'm saying? Plastic, non-plastic, burnable. It's so basic. Behavioral. Stop using plastic. Stop using plastic. It's as simple as that. When you go to, if ever you go to McDonald's, don't give me the spoon. Don't give me the fork. I don't need that. Use my paper. It's as simple as that. And we will contribute. See? It could be nice at that level, but if you don't change at our behavior individual level, nothing will happen. Think of your children. Think of your grandchildren.
Thank you, Dr. Alex.
Sorry,
so, yeah.
sorry, Praveen.
No problem. One more, in the interest of time, so we're going to start session 4. And to answer one of the queries from Paras also, what we can do, SDGs can be interlinked to national development strategies and local level strategies as well. So the government need to think about how to link the SDGs into their strategies in the local and national level as well. So now maybe we can have another time for Sohaib.
So with respect to the, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. So can you make it very brief?
Yeah, I'm just briefing it, concising it. I would like to add the dynamics with it, because the game is of power. Okay, there are basically 4 types of power. That is power over, power with, power within, and power to. Our focus should be on power within and power with. That would be creating the synergy 2 + 2 = 5, because this power over is mainly focused on, that is commonly understood. That is the type of power which is built on force and coercion. And that the power within, when we talk about it, is the concept of synergy 2 + 2 = 5. The power that you have possess and the power that we have. We have to build a harmony among them.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your relay. So now, in the interest of time, we will start our next session, which is financing for SDG localization. My colleague Samuel Dana will moderate this session. Mr. Samuel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Praveen, and your colleague presenters, especially Professor Brillantes, for all the very active discussions that have taken place. And I would like to use this opportunity to also welcome each one of you to this section. I know we're running behind time, so the section will commence shortly, and we'll try as much as possible to make it as brief and straightforward as possible. So I would like to greet you all once again. Good afternoon and greetings to you all who are joining us from Korea and other parts of the world. And I would like to appreciate your distinguished selves for being committed to this program, especially having joined us for the second day. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this particular section on risks informed on financing for SDGs. So for this section, just as has been shared on your screen, you find that we have just 2 presenters. We are not having any breakout section. We're going to have these 2 presentations. Then we move forward to the Q&A session and wrap up for today and for the event. So my name is Dana Samuel, as I mentioned previously. I work with the UMPOG as an associate capacity development expert. And this section will focus on financing for SDGs, just as I mentioned. The Addis Ababa action agenda, which is one of the global agendas, one of the groundbreaking agreements, it calls for financing for development. It's been realized that in many countries across the globe, there is a financing gap. There is an enormous challenge, especially on national governments in implementing the SDGs. And there is a need to call for how to find innovative ways of implementing or raising funds or mobilizing revenues to implement the SDGs, in addition to the already existing development challenges have. Especially at the local level, there's a growing and yawning gap between expected revenues or the exact revenues governments and local governments are able to mobilize, and the demands that comes with their development challenges. So many local governments especially are unable to implement these programs in being able to meet their investment or infrastructure demands vis-a-vis being able to meet the expected public services they are supposed to provide to their citizens. So it's against this backdrop that we find this particular topic very interesting and very important that we discuss and deliberate on how we can better plan, how we can better design, how we can better implement innovative practices in mobilizing finances to promote SDGs implementation at the local level, especially in most of our countries in the developing world. So this section, as I mentioned, has two presentations, and the first presenter in the person of Prabin Maharajan, who has been leading the previous section. He is going to deliver his presentation on financing for SDGs localization. So as we all know, he's a program management expert with UNPOG. Prabin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Samuel Dana. Can we have a slide? So just now, as indicated by Dana, about the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development. In more and more countries, like expenditures and even investment in sustainable development are being, developed to the subnational level, which often lacks adequate technical and technological capacity, financing, and support. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So financing, especially SDG 17, specifically underlined the significant areas of resources mobilization, including mobilization of own national resources, ODA, Official Development Account, and additional resources, securing departmental sustainability, adopting investment, and promote a regime. So in SDG 17, there are 5 targets which are related to the financing: 17.1, 17.2, 17.3, 17.4, and 17.5. Next slide, please. So there are some key steps to boost financing for SDGs, like we have been talking about, leadership in the previous session also. So providing leadership, like setting guiding principle, galvanizing actions, and ensuring policy coherence. So there's a both strong need and will for private sector to engage in financing the SDGs as well. However, public entities must still uphold 8 commitment, avoid excessive subsidies for private sector activities, and ensure that foreign economies activities does not crowd our domestic player. And so next slide, please. There are several challenges at both local and national level for SDG financing. For example, the UN estimate the gap in financing to achieve the sustainable development goal at 2.5 trillion per year in developing countries alone. So one of the biggest hurdle facing local government today is the mismatch between their increasing responsibilities and static revenues. Like many local government are unable to fund rising demand for investment in infrastructure and public services. And while urban development in certain countries have strong fiscal bases and are creditworthy, many local government have weaker fiscal bases, creditworthiness, and limited access to long-term funding. Moreover, static revenues of local governments might operate in framework with adequate capital and investment plan, which widens the gap in public financing. Next slide, please. So financing the SDGs requires significant public and private investment to bring this goal to life for all people everywhere. So, the UN General Secretary strategy for financing the 2030 agenda provides some strategies such as promoting collaboration between the banking sector, national and local government, and financial regulators to identify opportunities to increase long-term lending from banks, including through concessional loan in priority sector for sustainable development, and strengthening national, local, and city government capacity to improve long-term climate resilience infrastructure planning and promote the systematic forward-looking and whole of government and whole of society approach to infrastructure decision to address the barrier and leverage the opportunities to transform the financial system from global to local level in support of achievement of the 2030 agenda. Next slide, please. These are some of the financing toolbox, today development financing landscape is complex and fast evolving, encompassing a wide varieties of factors like, as you know, private, public, national, local, subnational, regional, global, with different constituencies like taxpayers, shareholders, trustees, etc., and with different motivation as well, like development or profit or both, and a multiplicity of financial instruments like grants, loan, guarantees, insurances. So this slide provides a snapshot of some of the most well-known important financing sources and instruments, although there are many more. Next slide, please. So this framework is developed by United Nations Financing Framework for Sustainable Development. And as you can see, our country's sustainable development strategies lays out what need to be financed. Integrated financing framework spell out how the national strategy will be financed and implemented. And the key elements of such frameworks are the main source of financing and non-financial financial and non-financial means of implementation, our national financing strategy, and the institution and process that underpin this relationship. Next slide, please. And there are four main building blocks for the design and operationalization of financing framework. The first one is assessment and diagnostic. Second one is the financing strategy. Third one is monitoring, review, and accountability, which is very important. And the fourth one is governance and coordination. And this building block for the design and the operationalization of financing framework, like inside this assessment and diagnostic also, there are four main type of assessments and diagnostics. So an assessment of financing and resources needs and an assessment of flow create a baseline understanding of financing gap. And the third element is an assessment of risk. And the final element is the diagnostic to identify policy, institutional, capacity binding constraint. And for the second building block, financing strategy, so it brings together priority financing policy actions. And the third one is mechanism for monitoring, review, and accountability. So the monitoring the impact of different financing flows and policies provide the basis for informed policy making, facilitates learning, adaptation of instruments and policies to enhance their impact and can help mitigate risk. And the last one is governance and coordination framework, where in which integrated financing frameworks need to have strong political backing and broad ownership. So this lesson emerges consistently from experiences with sustainable development strategies and financing policy reform efforts. So this calls for high-level government coordination mechanism and engagement of all stakeholders from national to local. Next slide, please. So national, regional, and local financing strategies do not work in isolation from one another. They work together. So effective coordination among all levels of government is fundamental for policy coherence and to create the necessary financial stream for sustainable projects in cities, territories, and local level. And embedding local plans within national development strategies should be supported by adequate financing to incentivize alignment efforts and ensure the transition to the implementation stage. The assessment of the financial costs associated with implementing the SDGs or the national development plan aligned with them will be very crucial at all levels of government. And multi-level governance coordination backed with adequate financing support can be levered to mobilize even more source of financing. Next slide, please. So the SDG target will need accelerated, development pathways to be achieved by 2030 agenda. So this pathway must be supported by effective financial management and additional financial resources. Local government engaged in SDG localization need to mobilize innovative financing mechanism and incorporate financial planning as an integral aspect of all action plan. So these are some of the financing strategies for localizing the SDGs, like local taxes and surcharges, user tariff, and others. Next slide, please. So so this table presents a variety of instruments ranging from public to private, which local government may use depending on national and local condition and level of investor confidence. Next slide, please. So there are 3 action areas for SDG localization, and these action areas for sustainable local financing include raising domestic revenues through user fees and taxes, and including defining the most appropriate type of taxation for subnational government and fostering sustainable access to long-term finances. And reform and action will, however, depend on specific country conditions, such as the existing experience of a country with decentralization, the legal system in place, and the level of institutional development and capacity. Next slide, please. So these are some financial innovation for SDG localization, like the participatory budgeting, which is a democratic process in which community members decide how to spend part of public budget. It gives people real power over real money. Another one is social impact bonds, which is an innovative financing mechanism and outcome-based contracting, which makes investment in societal problem possible. So these bonds are a model of public-private partnership designed to generate tangible outcome at affordable cost and with risks shared between government and private partners. Next slide, please. So in the context of COVID-19 emergency responses, local government are, they are very uniquely positioned to shape, adapt, and deliver a holistic response to epidemics. And because this epidemic produces multifaceted socioeconomic effect that threaten the social and governance fabric, it requires a cohesive response across sector boundaries to ensure alignment and synergies between different sector intervention and in particular locality. So there are some some of the one source revenue, intergovernmental transfer, subnational borrowing, and philanthropic finance are some of the financial resources that local government can put in place. So these are available in some countries with supportive legislative and policy environment. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, please send it to chat box. We'll be happy to answer the question. Thank you.
Sorry for the delay. So thank you so much, Prabin, for a very comprehensive and brief presentation on this very important topic. I think it's been insightful, and your presentation tried very much to highlight the existing financing mechanisms, frameworks that can help promote local and both national to local level and other innovative mechanisms. I think you brought it to bear and you made it very clear. It was so succinct that you stated some of the available mechanisms, and I know these are something that can help, especially not just financing local level development, but also as even in these times of pandemics like COVID, we still have to implement the SDGs, and we still have to even implement the challenges that comes with it, especially at the local level. And I think this is very informative going forward. So I think we'll be discussing more. So whilst we take the next presenter, we would like to look forward to receiving your questions where we can have a very good discussions on this very topical issues. So I would like to use this opportunity to invite our next presenter, who is in the person of Mr. Leonard Fleck. I hope I pronounced the name, sorry, very well, if I've not pronounced it very well. He is the Municipal Finance and Local Economic Development Expert with the UN Habitat. Mr. Fleck, presentation will focus on financing for SDGs as the same, but he's going to provide a new perspective based on his expertise. So, Mr. Fleck, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Samuel. It's a pleasure to be here. You would like to, would you prefer me to share the presentation?
It's shared already, so just say next when you want to move to the next slide.
Great, thanks so much. I realize I only have a very short time span to talk about this very broad topic, and so I hope I'll be able to say something valuable or interesting to all the participants. Please proceed to the next slide. So we've already heard from Prabin and other speakers that there's a huge financing gap. Different methodologies exist estimating how large it is, but some suggest that it's around $2.5 trillion that we need additionally each year to meet the SDG targets by 2030. Currently, we're not on track to delivering that. And on the right-hand side in the box, you will see some of the some statistics outlining the gap in terms of achieving the SDGs. Some statistics such as 660 million people lack access to water, billion people lack access to roads, and so on. Please proceed to the next slide. And we know also that in terms of where this gap is located, where is the investment needed to reach the SDGs, it's primarily located in developing countries. So 5.9% of global GDP is the investment need in Africa. There's a missing investment of 1.7% in Africa. And you also have the statistics of some of the other continents in the world. Please proceed to the next slide. There are also, a lot of different methodologies and studies that have been carried out to try to estimate where, in which SDGs and which areas investment is most needed. And this graph provides you an indication of some of these needs. We know that there's need in terms of investing into power infrastructure to facilitate access to electricity. There's a need, of course, to work on the environment, transportation, telecommunications. So it really spans the gamut of all the SDGs. Please proceed. And we also know that the gap is 2.5 trillion per year, and we're currently not meeting that. We're not able to fill that gap, which means that the gap is going to continue growing. And if we're not to radically change what we're doing, the gap is going to be something of around 33 trillion by 2030. And so we're in a race against time to try to find resources to close this financing gap. Please proceed. And so, having outlined kind of the challenge that we're facing, I want to talk a little bit about what the options are for us to address this big problem. And there are various frameworks or ways of looking at what the options are. There's this framework that was put forward by the International Finance Corporation, which splits the sources of funding into domestic and foreign. And I would like to speak about foreign briefly before going over to the domestic. Please proceed. So one way of looking at addressing this financing gap is saying that, well, really the gap is huge, but it's not that big because it's 2.5 trillion is about 2% of world GDP. And we know that advanced economies generate around 30% of their GDP in taxes. And so if we do the math, we can come up with a percentage of the budget of developed economies that they would have to, that they would be able to share with developing economies in order to close the gap. And there have been provisions of this sort in the past where you know, countries are supposed to provide a certain amount of their budget towards development cooperation. And at the moment, we're not meeting those targets. However, please proceed to the next slide. We have also seen that this type of development assistance hasn't achieved the kind of successes that we would have wanted it to have. This is, of course, a complicated debate, and I cannot do justice to it now. But I would want to highlight that, for instance, some scholars, such as William Easterly, would suggest that actually, as aid increased in Africa, per capita growth decreased. Now, there are other studies from other people who would show other results. It depends what time span you look at and which countries in particular you're looking at. But overall, meta studies of all the, if you take all the studies that exist on the impact of aid, there's no conclusive positive impact of aid on development. And there are various explanations for this. And you would have people like Jeffrey Sachs who would say, well, really, there's not enough aid. It's like, you know, you're maybe in a hole, and if you try to climb out of it and you jump and you don't reach the top, you can't hold on to the top of the hole, then that jump didn't get you anywhere. So really you need to jump a whole lot higher to be able to get out of this development trap. And so then he proposes the Millennium Villages and so on. But other people like William Easterly would say, well, really the model is broken. It's like we can put more fuel into a broken car, but it's not going to go anywhere. And the reason why there's some systemic issues with the development system is that the accountability mechanisms are skewed towards the donors. So there's no local ownership of reforms. Money is brought in from abroad with foreign goals, sometimes without local knowledge, without local ownership. And so it's not customized to the conditions on the ground, and it's not
Can you mute your mic if you're not speaking, if you're not the presenter? Thank you. Mr. Fleck, can you unmute yours and continue with your presentation?
So there's some incentive challenges around aid, and and what we see is that donors would like to see that their money has been used well, and they would like to see, oh, a road has been built or a school has been built, but it's not in their interest to really find out whether that school provided an improved level of education or not. And it's similar, you know, when governments are given this additional aid and they're providing it to their populations, it's easy money for them, and they're not having to work hard for it. They're not having to be very careful in how they spend it. And so people like Tony Brett would say that aid shields states from responsible governance. So I can't do justice to this debate, but I think it's clear that there are shortcomings of the development aid model, and one cannot really look to this for solutions to achieving the SDGs. Please proceed. The other argument that's commonly made is, you know, well, if it's not aid, what other foreign resources are there? And they say private investment. You know, we want PPPs, we want private sector to invest in achieving SDGs and, you know, providing infrastructure in developing economies. And the argument for that is based on the fact that there's a lot of private capital out there. Some suggest that it's 100 trillion. So this is a logarithmic scale here on your left side. So it's 40 times the annual infrastructure gap that we have available in, you know, people who would be potentially interested in investing. The reality is, however, that the value of PPPs in emerging economies is only 100 billion. So for a whole series of reasons, that private money is not going into the PPPs in developing economies. And even within those PPPs, we would find that most of the investment comes from the public sector. It's not private sector that's being drawn into providing this infrastructure. And there are a lot of reasons for this. There's, of course, opportunity cost. Private investors are they're looking for the most profitable or the largest return on investment, and that's often not provided by infrastructure projects in developing economies. The risks are too high. The users of these infrastructure projects often cannot pay for them, so they need to be cross-subsidized, and that's you need to do via taxes, which are sometimes minimal, and we'll look at that next. So let's please move to the next slide. So coming now to this, the area of domestic finance, having just kind of outlined in a very brief way why I think that, of course, foreign investment has a lot of potential, but we also should be a little bit skeptical as to whether it's going to be able to close the gap. So please move to the next slide. And I'll be talking about the tax side more than the private savings side, just for the sake of time. So one thing I think, and I'm going to somehow make an argument that domestic resource mobilization is key to closing the gap. And one of the reasons for this is that ultimately, whether you're getting a loan or you have a private investor that's building an infrastructure project together with a public entity, you will need to pay back the loan or the private investor somehow. And at the end of the day, it's going to be the user or the taxpayer who needs to pay for it. So we're just finding ways, innovative ways of buying ourselves time, but ultimately that money still needs to come from the taxpayers. And so there's a reason for us to build our ability to tax in developing countries. The other argument is that when you tax your citizens, you're actually increasing accountability of how you're spending. You're strengthening the social contract, as they say. And that is also why we see a very strong correlation, and this is the somewhat complex graphs you're seeing on the left side, between GDP per capita and tax revenue per capita. So generally, as countries increase their GDP per capita, they'll be able to harness a larger percentage of their GDP in tax revenue. Developed economies will be capturing around 30 to 40%, whereas now lower income or middle income countries will be around 10 to 25%. Please move to the next slide. And so I should have added that same relationship holds true at the local level, so within local governments. And I don't want to digress too much, but just to make the point that this taxation story has been the part of the formation of modern states. Here we have the budgets of England and Prussia, two of the earlier modern states, let's say. And as you can see here, most of their budgets would be going towards military expenditure. As the warfare and the types of weapons that you required to carry out war changed and required more money as they developed tanks and so on, the feudal lords, let's say, had to extract more and more resources from their citizens. And at some point, citizens, were saying, well, what do we get out of this? You're taxing us so much. What are we getting from you? And so that's kind of how the development of the modern state took place, and the services were increased, and ultimately, democracy came about. So taxation has really a key role to play, not just in terms of closing the financing gap, but also being more effective in how you spend your existing resources. Please move to the next slide. And this is just a somewhat confusing diagram from a McKinsey report on the SDG financing gap. Essentially, it says that 40% of our government spending is not being done in an effective way. And And I have there's some, a lot of other statistics on this. The African Development Bank, for instance, suggests that 70% of public spending goes towards procurement, and 20 to 60% of that is wasted. So there's a huge amount of scope for improvement in how we're spending our existing resources, not just in how we are bringing in additional resources. And that, of course, which is the argument I'm trying to make here, is that in order to enhance the efficiency of our expenditure, we need to think carefully of where that money comes from. And when it's brought in from the outside in an easy way, there isn't the same accountability, there isn't the same pressure on local governments to deliver than when they're actively taxing their citizens. Please move on. And so, having said that, DRM I'm trying to make the case that even though there are a lot of different ways, maybe there should be more of an emphasis on domestic resource mobilization, DRM. But of course, that's not easy. We know there are structural impediments to, or structural reasons why developing economies do not harness such a significant percentage of their GDP in tax revenue. We know that when the economy is more agricultural, it's more difficult to tax. Informal economies are difficult to tax. There are kind of systemic issues around corruption, which are difficult to overcome by tax administrations. But ultimately, there's also kind of a political problem. The way that tax systems work is a reflection of where power is in society. It's a very political process. And increasing domestic taxes would require, for instance, taxing of wealthy, potentially powerful elites within countries. It would potentially require taxing foreign investors more, which is difficult to carry out politically. And of course, politicians never want to tax. They're always happier if they can get the money from somewhere else, because then citizens will be making larger claims on them. And so I don't have the time to get into this in a lot of detail, but just to say that ultimately it's a very political process, and to overcome or to incentivize politicians to use or to build more on local taxation, we need also a narrative change to at least make it a key vision for us to pursue. Please move on to the next slide. And so I just want to end with the work that we are doing at UN Habitat, which is what I spend most of my time on. It's a domestic resource mobilization, but at the local level. We work mostly with local governments. And what I've been talking about was mostly centered on the national context, but I think to a large extent, the same applies to local governments, who also, of course, have access to foreign or external resources, grants from national governments, PPPs, maybe loans, but they also have their own taxes. And this is what we focus on, and we try to optimize together with local governments. And we've developed, this is just a photo of us working in Kenya, in Kiambu, where we were able to double local revenues in the space of a year. And please proceed to the next slide. And basically, just really briefly, we estimated the potential, what they could be making from their current tax authority. And we tried to see where are they losing it? Which revenue streams is this potential being lost in? And so, for instance, in this particular case, we found that land rates or property taxes were most of the potential of that local government was lost. And so that is where they should be focusing their optimization efforts. And we work with them to find out, okay, why is it being lost? Usually it's large landowners, and we devise a strategy accordingly. And please proceed to the next slide. I think this is the last one. And so we're in the process of building a comprehensive tool or approach for how local governments can optimize their revenues. We are in the process of finalizing it now. We've been testing it in places around the world, and hopefully we'll have something for public usage soon. and I'd be happy to share more information on that with you in case you're interested. I think this is the one more slide. Oh yeah, just as in conclusion, just to summarize what I've said. So I think the gap is huge. We know there's urgent need to address it. We know there are a lot of different options and maybe an overemphasis on foreign funding. I think there's a case to make that domestic resource mobilization should move more central into the debate around how to close the SDG financing gap at the national as well as at the local level. And that requires political will. And that's why more emphasis needs to be placed on that. We do have some tools to help local governments optimize their own source revenues, but there are of course many approaches and tools out there to help local and national governments to optimize their tax revenues. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this was interesting to you.
Thank you very much for such a data-oriented and excellent presentation. And I think there's a compelling presentation that provides evidence as to what is really happening on the ground. And I think this session tried to provide a balance between what is in there and what is the evidence to support each of the available mechanisms in place. I think you provided a new perspective on this, and our audience or listeners have really gained much, including myself. I think so this presentation even showed the shortcomings of each of the available ones and how we could proceed with that. So whilst we prepare to go to the next section, so I want to thank you once again for an excellent presentation and for your great delivery. So we still receive questions and we'll be directing them. So you can channel your questions through the chat box and just kindly let me know who you want to direct the question to. So we should all know that there is an endless list of financing mechanisms available, because the two speakers tried to show us what is available and how countries and governments are able to leverage these available sources, and they try to emphasize that the gap is still there. It's a yawning one or it's a growing one, but whilst we look at both from the internal or national or local level and outside, we try to balance this. But I would like to also say that we can look at the combination of each of the mechanisms available. Then I think especially for developing nations, capacities to be able to manage or generate these resources is one, and being able to manage these funding sources that comes, especially at the local level, should be looked at. We should also contextualize each of the mechanisms. For instance, you talk about bond issues, you talk about maybe the local government can have the opportunity to go to the financial market to even raise money. Sometimes they don't have the capacity to do so. And in some contexts, that may not be workable. So whilst we tend to learn from each other countries or what is available or what is working in other contexts, we should look at our own context. But I think we should there's as he mentioned, there is an ongoing debate, and I don't know when it might end, but as to the effectiveness of aid. And one reason even for local mobilization of funds has been the mismanagement of these funds. There is a lot of leakages that needs to be plugged. Once you keep even receiving all the billions and it keeps draining, when there is a kind of corruption, mismanagement, and misappropriations of financial resources is another thing. And we also learned about tax. But I think in most societies, because of limited database and other things, it's just a handful of people who are really paying the tax. So we need to broaden the tax network so that we don't overburden the already people paying the taxes. There should be legislations to promote local governments' capacities to be able to mobilize funding, because some have a cap as to how much they can mobilize to support local development. And it was very interesting to also hear about property tax. I think in many developing countries, this is one area we call it as a gold mine, which remains untapped, because many properties are not valued and many properties are not even taxed. So people just think that apart from engaging in the petty trading and other income taxes, many of the properties which could provide a huge source of funding is left out. So we can also learn from this presentation and try to look at it. So I think we'll proceed with the question and answer section. So with the first question, I'm coming. We have a question from one question from MV Mendoza to Mr. Fleck. Do you have a mapping of countries by level of OSR and your intervention to bridge and optimize OSR to bridge the funding gap for SDGs, I think, and other planning? I don't know if whether you understand the question. Is in the chat box, but I don't know especially what OSR stands for off my head.
Yeah, so OSR.
Do you understand the question?
Yeah, so OSR, the own source revenues, basically the taxes and fees that have been devolved to local governments. And I think there's a bit of a challenge around data. We're trying to compile a municipal finance database to collect and clean all the data that exists around subnational finance, local governments. But there's some data, I can share it with the group, from UCLG to 2018, which lists OSR from, I think, 60 countries from around the world. And it's quite useful, and I've worked with it before. I think generally, some people make the argument that OSR ultimately is still a small component of local government revenue. Most of the time it's, between 10 and 20% of local budgets. And so people say, well, if we work on 10 to 20%, even if we double it, it's still not going to be enough to close the infrastructure gap. But I think the key point is that oftentimes we're not speaking of doubling. We're speaking, places I've worked, they can increase their OSR 5 times. And they can almost be, if you're at 20% of your budget from OSR 5 times, mean now you're self-sufficient. And when you do leverage your OSR effectively, now you get access to loans. You now have means to pay back private investments, and you're now accessing more sophisticated forms of finance. But it's a good entry point for most places in terms of municipal finance reform. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much for such an elaborate answer. I think there's this suggestion from Mr. Masood that I have a suggestion. I just want to read it out before we move to the next question. I have a suggestion for resolving financial issues in SDGs. So in my understanding, government and monetary authorities must continue to stabilize financial markets by continuing to inject much needed liquidity, and governments must partner with private sector financial institutions to roll over debt to SME. So he's trying to suggest that we promote PPPs and other things in that area. There's this other question. So from, I don't know if it's a male or female, and Humi Epifani, she says, or he says, okay, thanks. How do we create public and private partnership in local level? Please, could you share some best approaches and practices? So I think in essence, how do you create PPPs at a local level? And are there any best practices we could share?
Okay,
to
let
any of
me
the two
answer.
presenters, Mr.
Let me put it the one I explained before, social impact bonding. So these are like one kind of one model of public-private partnership, which is designed to generate like tangible outcomes at affordable cost and with risk shared between the government and the private partners. So this typically involve a payment for outcomes, contract between government and an intermediary who commit to achieving specific social or environmental outcomes. And once this outcome have been achieved and are verified, pre-agreed payment is received from the government. And the bond component of typical structure comes from the intermediary issuing a bond against the value of the future payment from the government. So this bond may be taken by a commercial or philanthropic actors. In this way, the upfront costs of the project are financed by third parties, and government spending occurs only once the result have been achieved. So this mitigates the challenges of committing upfront public funding for projects with uncertain long-term outcome. And it also means risks are shared between government and the intermediary and the purchaser of the bond. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prabin, for the submission. Mr. Fleck, do you want to add anything else? Okay.
I have one reservation, which is the presentation presented by Leonard Fleck. We all tried just to increase the taxation from government upon public. Why we are not trying to improve the per capita income of citizens, or the government should focus upon such friendly business environment that the people should have so much earnings that they should pay taxation happily instead of paying forcefully. We are just focusing upon increasing the level of taxation rather focusing upon business-friendly environment in our country.
Okay, thank you for the question. Mr. Fleck, do you want to say anything about that?
I wanted to comment, excellent question from Masood. If you allow me just to comment on the PPP point first. I wanted to say that there's several, and I'll get back to Masood. There's several reasons why PPPs are not really happening in local governments in emerging economies. And part of that is that there are regulatory hurdles, and they need to be there to some extent, because otherwise, if local governments are not able to honor the provisions of the PPPs, then public assets become private assets, will be turned over to the investors, and that can be problematic. Or national governments need to bail out somehow local governments. So there need to be some kind of national regulations around this. The other thing is we just don't have the bankable projects. And there's, of course, it requires a lot of capacity to come up with an investable project for private investors. But oftentimes also there isn't a bankable project around within the local government context, because you need to somehow convince the private investor that you're going to be able to pay back that investment. And oftentimes in low-income countries, you cannot charge users enough to cover the expenditure that you have in creating the assets. So you need to cross-subsidize. And so again, you need to have transfers or OSR in place to do that. So it's not an easy thing to do. And so my answer to your question really is, as tempting as it is to try to bring on board private investors, if you're struggling to do so, probably it's an indication that you need to work on some of the municipal finance foundations first. And that's probably a case for working on OSR. And when that has been fixed, then you can move on to these more complex ways of accessing external finance. I wanted to respond to Masood quickly. I think it's an excellent question, Masood, because there is a trade-off in terms of taxation and economic growth. If we tax more, then potentially we're making the business environment less friendly, we're deterring investment and so on. But I think that trade-off doesn't need to be there, because there are a lot of loopholes within the systems. Increasing tax revenue isn't just about increasing tax rates. It's about making sure that those who are supposed to pay are actually paying. Usually we're looking at compliance rates, which are very low. And some people, there's not always a case to be made that people who aren't paying, if they would be paying, they would be undermining the economy. It's not the case. You're looking at people who are putting their money abroad into foreign banks who should be taxed locally so that that money can circulate back into the economy. So I think there are instances where there is that trade-off, but there are a lot of instances where it's not there, and governments should be focusing on those first as the quick wins.
Very nice explanation, Mr. Fleck. But one slide of your presentation indicates that most government, the amount which collected from taxation are paid in military expenditures rather on civil expenditures. I think there should be international peace agreement among different countries so that the military expenditure could be reduced and the saved amount from military expenditure should be used in sustainable goals which we are discussing and overall welfare of general public instead of wars, instead of purchasing equipment of wars, weapons and etc.
Okay, thank you so much. I think this is an interesting topic that the debate can continue even after this section. I would like to take the last question, which has been submitted in the box from Dr. Brillantes to Mr. Fleck. So he says, nice and critical discussion on aid especially. But as you know, the discourse on aid as obstacle has been going on since the 70s and 80s. What are the levers of reform to address this? Is this school of thought being mainstream at the level of international organizations like the UN? So it's in two parts. The first, the levers for reform to address this. If you are able to, you can provide a response to him. Yeah.
I was hoping Prabin would come in so I would have some time to think about my response. I mean, I think just off the top of my head there, one of the schools of thought to increase the efficiency of aid is to do more monitoring and evaluation, for us to better understand what works and what doesn't, and then to focus on things where we know, on projects that we know work. So there's this whole trend of M&E and impact assessments to understand what the impacts are and where we should be replicating things. But I think at the same time we're undermining that trend, the trend makes sense, I think, but we're undermining it by having a almost religious focus on innovation. And so innovation is we just want to do new things, but then it's good to do new things and try new things, but we're not learning from what has happened and what hasn't worked. And so, and donors, again, often want to see innovative projects because things aren't working. So they want to see something different. But now we're just doing something different that also doesn't work. And there isn't much of an improvement and idea of knowledge building. There are other reforms within the system to increase the efficiency of aid, but I think there are no real solutions at this point to the systemic incentive problems that the aid system has. And so I'm a little bit pessimistic, but I would be happy to hear from my colleagues at the UN. Maybe they have a more optimistic view on this.
Okay, thank you for the submission. I think you provided a good response to that, especially I think with the issue about aid, there is something which is never ending because it's very multifaceted and issues about conditionalities comes in, especially from the funding agencies or multilateral institutions, even from the donor governments, issues about the receiving governments, the systems of government, the institutions in place to monitor this, and even the intentions behind the aid or the development assistance given out. So it looks a bit of complex and we may not have a definite answer, but just as Mr. Fleck mentioned, we can always learn from experience. Especially he mentioned proponents like Jeffrey Sachs who propose we having more aid. He implemented the Millennium Development Projects in most African countries, and most from the receiving communities, it was termed as a big failure. So there are many debates ongoing, but I think the national governments or the receiving government should put in the necessary institutions, the structures, and put their national interest first when receiving aid or development assistance. And if we close in these loopholes and other things, we could go further or far. But just as I mentioned, I'm not saying it's the best way, but not only aid, we could combine it with this taxation, broaden the tax network, getting more money, be more accountable to the people, and let the local or the funds that come from the local context should be increased so that there's more ownership from the people. Otherwise, you just pour the money in there and people think that, okay, it's free money, let's waste it. So I think it's very complex, dynamic, but it provides lessons for us going forward. So I think we are running out of time, but there's a question, maybe Prabin or somebody is from Paras. Is there any centralized mechanism for tracking findings in SDGs to local government for better outcomes? If you could provide a response to that quickly, I think we need to wrap up.
Yeah, let me quickly go for this answer. Like there are lots of centralized mechanism for tracking, not only like financing and other. There are lots of other tracking mechanisms developed by UN and other stakeholders. You can go through for those kind of thing, and then certainly like for especially localizing when we talk about financing the SDG localization. So there need to be some kind of mechanism developed by national level. So there are many mechanisms for tracking the findings in SDGs, and there are lots of the trackers like SDG trackers, SDG dashboard developed by UN and country specific as well. Like Bangladesh has SDG tracker, India has SDG dashboard. Those kind of mechanism can be used to track the finding or to track the progress of the SDGs at the local level also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think for the sake of time, we need to wrap up. So first, I would like to make the following short announcement. We will still want to receive feedback from you as to how this program was conducted. So as on your screen, we also have to submit the link in the chat box. Kindly provide feedback to our post-event survey. It's brief, so just try to tell us what you learned, how it went, and what we should do, and maybe possibly what you want to know in future. And we also want, this is a toolkit piloting. There is a link to the main toolkit online. You can access it free of charge, and you can provide comments to us to tell us how the toolkit is being done. And you can also let us know, have your feedback on to how we are going to improve it going forward. It's not a fixed document. We make it as a living document where we are welcoming new ideas as time goes and as the days unfold. So I know we all agree with me that we really had an exciting time, and we had great presentations from our excellent presenters. So on behalf of my colleagues from UNPOG, on behalf of the head of office, I would like to express once again our sincerest appreciation to all of you, for especially to our listeners, for your very attentive and active participation. We do appreciate your contributions and everything you did. Particularly, I would like to also express our deepest gratitude to our distinguished speakers, Dr. Brillantes and Mr. Leonard Fleck, who joined Prabin to deliver the sections. Please accept our warmest congratulations. We would like to also thank Professor Wang, Professor Jong, and other staff from SNU, the students who are joining us and alumni joining us from all over the world. We'd like to say thank you so much for your immeasurable contribution to this excellent program. To Pravin, the focal point, and our UNPOG colleagues and our very dedicated interns, I would like to say that you've all been awesome and for a successful program. So I'd like to say thank you so much once again, and we look forward to seeing you in our future programs, and you can always stay connected. Have a wonderful day, wonderful night, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pravin.
Thank you.